One. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stage 501. Tonight, I'm your host and MC, Ray M. We have some great guests and topics for you today. The title of the stream is Elections Still Have Consequences. So let's move forward with the introductions, and I guess I'll just start with myself first, as I tend to do. So, as you know, I approach politics from the perspective of the socialist third worldism tendency, and I'm an advocate of post-colonial feminism. And so we'll move to the next guest we've got. Anthony, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, Ray. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Avista-Bisson. I am a contributor for Jerusalem Post. I tend to focus on the Middle East and North African region with an emphasis on minority rights. I am leaning in terms of my politics, centre-left. I am a liberal and a liberal internationalist in terms of my foreign policy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Chris Lafond.
Yeah, I'm Chris. I am a poly-leftist, libertarian, sock-dem syndicalist. I decided to shorten it today.
Yeah, because usually it's the longest introduction here.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that said, we'll introduce the next guest, who is Frederick Voltaire Bastiat.
I'm just a fellow political traveler that somehow stumbled upon on this strange podcast of yours. So I'm glad to be on.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on, and I hope to have you on a lot more times in the future as well. So, Coronis the Great.
Well, hello there. My name is Coronis, as you said. To put it simply, I'm a centrist. On domestic politics, I am socially liberal and fiscally conservative, but in the Lloyd Blankfein sense. And on international relations, I espouse a combination of internationalist and realist views. So essentially, I stick to the empirical evidence, and that leads me to adopting left-wing and right-wing views.
Okay, always good to have your balanced take. And the sixth person we have on today, who is the Politicrat.
Hello, it is I, the Politicrat. Wait, is my mic on?
It is indeed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is I, the Politicrat. I, first and foremost, consider myself a political realist, so very similar to Coronis. I like to look at the empirical evidence, and I base my policy decisions and beliefs based upon those essential facts. So economically, I consider myself pretty hard right, but I also believe in like some welfare, also because you need a little help here and there. And then I consider myself culturally conservative, but socially liberal. If that makes any sense. But and then but yeah, I'd say I'm your run of the mill, your run up the John Stuart Mill, classical liberal, civic nationalist type.
Okay, always good to have you on as well. So, as you might recall, I was on your show just last week as well. It was a pretty good time we had, I think.
It was, I agree. I'd love to have you back on as well.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, we safely got past the introductions without me somehow forgetting what I was doing or reading the wrong line, anything like that. Truly incredible. That might actually mark the first time we've actually accomplished this without me making any mistakes. Amazing, right? Amazing. So, with that said, I don't know. We should probably move to the first topic, unless anyone has anything else they want to sort of like add in there, anything lighthearted they want to put in at the beginning before we go forward on these topics.
Why is the stream called Elections Still Have Consequences? Are we sure about that anymore?
Yeah. You were mentioning this before we started. Are we sure that elections even mean anything anymore? Well, you will probably see over the course of this live stream, I think the listeners will see over the course of this live stream, it matters. Who they put into power, it really actually does matter. So, we'll see. I should probably change the title because we're still at welcome. So, like, what was our first topic? Our first topic was, Japan LDP election, right? So if I say that, it should probably change to actually suit that. There we go. So Japan LDP election. So me and Anthony were talking about this a while ago, which is, what problems is Japan facing? Who can deal with them best? And how Shinzo Abe had attempted, through Abenomics and through his ideas, Womenomics and so on, was attempting to deal with the fundamental underpinnings of why Japan was not able to get productive growth on a level that was desired over the past decade and a half or so, let's say. So, from your perspective, Anthony, like, what were the underpinnings that you would ordinarily think people would think is the problem here?
Well, ordinarily, people would attach the lack of immigration to Japan as a factor in economic, you could say, stagnation. However, I was watching I think you sent me a link from I can't remember, International Institute of Security Studies, a guy by the name of David Atkinson. I think that's the correct name of
Yes,
him. He
David
was making an Yeah, he was making an argument that what in fact is happening is that there's a lack of effective classification when it comes to the size of companies. So, for example, he said, something classed as a retail company in Japan can be like, 40 classes, like 40 people, whereas
30.
in
3 to
30 people. By the way, Politicrat, you need to mute your mic because I can hear echo.
Oh, the microwave. Sorry.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry. So his central thing was that if you compare it to an American company like Walmart, technically a big company in Japan is just a company with just about 30 people, which compared to Walmart, which has like millions of people, you can see why there's a problem in that. So one of his arguments was to change the classification for companies and change the quota established for what is considered companies, as well as just also increasing, I think it was productivity, if I recall. That was his central, one of his central arguments. So I take that approach.
Together. These things were definitely linked together as well. The increase in productivity that Japan needed to get was structurally difficult to do because you had the government handing down lots of things from on high, like, you need more female employees because who are on the fast track as opposed to on the slow track, because as you know, Japan has a 2-track system, unfortunately. Even though it's not literally encoded into law, there's effectively a 2-track system in Japan where basically women do not get ahead as much as men do, despite same levels of commitment to job, right? So, the government was basically mandating that there needs to be certain quotas getting filled here, and they need to overcome these historical prejudices. However, what Atkinson pointed out that was so true was that it's difficult to ask companies to overcome these prejudices if the average size of a company is like 3 to 30 people. How do you actually engage in the kind of social justice and social revitalization moves that you need to do if everything is a tiny small business that can't afford to do any of these things?
And then also, like, you also come to the point where sometimes that could be an impediment on how well the business can perform if you instate that kind of equity. But
Exactly.
with that small business, you'll have somebody who is not a female who is much better as an individual at their job than the other person.
Exactly. And so Atkinson, and you're exactly on point. And this is the point that Atkinson and which Shinzo Abe himself must have come to agree with at some point when they realized that, okay, they're mandating these things, but people are not implementing them. The reason why they can't implement them is because their companies are too small. They can't make the choices without damaging the company in some way. And so what is the barrier, the impediment to actually having these companies engage in mergers and acquisitions and to expand?
And then plus on average, you have certain jobs that men generally gravitate towards more.
Yeah, and there was that as well. So you can't, exactly. So you couldn't just do it as a blanket mandate on every company that exists. So the only way to actually address this in a way that was functional would be to eliminate the tax barriers to the expansions of companies in the service sector in the first place. And it obviously, of course, in other sectors that are relevant to the task they're trying to accomplish, right?
This would also have to include as well as updating just technology, because I remember David Atkinson was saying that essentially there were a lot of Japanese companies that were still using fax machines.
Fax machines, indeed. And so big data and even just basic automation were a real problem because of the fact that, like, if you have a company that consists of 5 to 6 people, for example, what is there to automate? You see what I mean? And so by removing the barriers to growing your company, it then incentivizes and makes possible the leveraging of big data, the use of automation, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not that people want to grow. It's that they did want to grow all along. It's that they get penalized if they do. The entire tax system is structured to penalize you if you try to grow your company, and that has to be stopped. And so that is something which the new Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga, is going to try to do in his continuation of the Abe legacy. He's going to build on what was done before, but do it in a way that is more intuitive.
Real quick, can we address what it is about East Asian countries and fax machines? Because do you remember when North Korea, this was back maybe 2013 or so, North Korea sent an angry fax to South Korea, and it was like they thought it was going to be a declaration of war.
Oh yes, I do remember that. So yes, the whole fax machine thing. I mean, it is a symptom of parts of the economy being stuck in this kind of like weird rut where no one wants to grow out of the legacy structure.
90s, it's kind of like 90s mentality.
Because when people build a certain amount of infrastructure, it then becomes like extremely difficult to get people to get unused to that infrastructure and to change it. I mean, you all were having this conversation with me, ironically enough, just before this stream, where people were saying, why are you still using Google Hangouts as part of the back end of what you're doing here? And what was my response? My response was, legacy. Literally.
I thought you said you were just trying to copy Academic Agent.
Definitely not. It just so happened that that everyone was using Google Hangouts at like the beginning of the whole people doing live streams thing, and then I've just never changed it since then. And so anytime someone asks me how can we still see that in the backdrop of all of this, you've got like various layers and alpha masks, all that are over the top of what looks like it's basically still Google Hangouts. I'm just like, well, legacy. And this is the thing which I think that like if you were to extrapolate that to answer your question, like there's an East Asian cultural issue with people getting stuck on stuff and not wanting to change it. So I think Yoshihide.
I mean, it explains why China has pretty much been like culturally and aesthetically the same since like 3,000 years ago, like architecturally and everything.
Yes, still liking this, still standing the same stuff. 3,000.
Minus
the Shang
that time
Dynasty.
period where Wu Zetian, minus the Wu Zetian period. That was the one time China
minus
changed.
the Wu Zetian period where she basically shook things up a lot.
Yeah, she was like, you know what? Screw Confucianism. We're going Buddhist. That was the one time China was Buddhist.
Did you guys ever see the one? I think it was there's that website run by, I've forgotten his name. There's a website. There was this British guy who used to run a website where he would actually he would chronicle. No, it's called Badass of the Week or something. That was it. There's the Badass of the Week website, and like Wu Zetian actually has a page on that site now. And when you go there, like I think the first thing on the page is like her face, and then written under it, what is it? There's no room for something. It was lyrics. It was lyrics from Wu-Tang Clan or something, I'm sure.
Are you sure it wasn't lyrics from Mulan?
No. I think the subtitle was "There's no space to hide once I step inside the room."
To defeat the Han.
And then when you scroll further down, it gets to the part where she like overthrows the entire the entire dynasty and begins implementing her own security services or whatever. I think the subtitle for that one was something like "Protect Your Neck." It was very funny.
Did they send me dollars
when we asked for son?
Speaking of protect your neck, by the way, with Yoshihide Suga being in charge now, he's immediately taken. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kono Taro, who was previously, I think he was a Minister of Defense before, and he was extremely popular because he's very outspoken and he likes basically just calling it like it is. And so just before Suga took the position of Prime Minister,
is he a liberal? Is he a liberal Democrat too? Sorry to interrupt,
yes,
but
yes. I mean, everyone here, it's just different factions.
I'm trying to find my the Economist I bought from last week that I was planning on using to do some research for this, but I lost track of time.
No, it's fine. But basically, Kono Taro, he was moved from his position in the cabinet and put to a different position in the cabinet where he was put to it was some kind of like portfolio-less like regulatory reform or something. And so people started speculating, is the arrival of Yoshihide Suga a signal that Kono Taro will be demoted, considering he's been moved from a position that everyone thought he was quite popular in to some new weird position they've just made up called regulatory reform. So I immediately said no, because the last time this happened, who did this happen to? It happened to Nakasone the first time, where he was in that position. He was moved to some weird position of regulatory reform, and then the next cycle, he was the one who became prime minister. Now, why? Because regulatory reform, in terms of like how to save money, how to make it so you don't have these ridiculous systems that are inefficient, is the burning and most pressing thing for the Japanese government right now. So to put him in that position at this time in history is not a demotion, it's a promotion. And a sign of that promotion taking place is when they took the photographs, and this will sound like, I guess you could call it Tokyo-ology, if you like, kind of like how the Kremlin has Kremlinology, right? So I'm looking at it from the spectrum of Tokyoology. When they took the photograph of who was in the cabinet, it was Kono Taro who was standing behind Yoshihide Suga to his left-hand side in the second row. And Kono Taro then tweeted that picture on Twitter and said, I am in the photograph in the second row, full stop. So he would not have written that if that wasn't considered to be a promotion. And so I think we're going to see a lot more from Kono Taro going forward. And the world will probably be seeing a lot more of his face in a lot more issues going forward. Because, I mean, this portfolio list, almost like you could do anything so long as it's reform thing, it just means he can do anything he wants now so long as it results in efficiency.
Right. I do want to ask, what do you think is the likelihood of success for Yoshida Suga's economic policies? Do you think they'll be able to reverse the stagnation that's at the moment?
If he is able to actually push these things through and he is able to overcome the bad behavior of certain ministries. So, for example, I've heard some people talking about the idea that Yoshihide Suga is going to do an end run around METI, which is the Ministry of the Ministry of Industry and blah blah. He's going to try to do an end run around their entire ministry so that he can implement ideas directly, because people have been saying for a long time that when you send something through METI, it just sort of goes there to die because the bureaucracy wants to do what it wants to do, and it doesn't want to be sort of lectured by others. And I also think another thing that shows Yoshihide Suga's power is that he is largely being characterized as an individual who has, over the course of the last couple of years, enacted a certain amount of discipline within the bureaucracy, and now the bureaucracy, apparently, to quote them, fears him and will obey him. And he has promoted people to positions within the Japanese governmental bureaucracy who all either owe him a favor or are deferential to him for some other reason, or are just downright afraid of him. So when he says that something's going to have to happen, I'm anticipating now it's going to be less of a negotiation now. You're going to have less time wasted with people having conversations, because when Suga speaks, I'm expecting that there's going to be a more rapid compliance than there was before. So this compliance from the government will be rapid. In terms of the economy on the ground amongst private citizens and so on, that's where the big question mark is, i.e. when the government enacts something, will the public respond to it in the way that is expected, or will there be unintended consequences? And that's where policymaking is going to be extremely important. So it's not going to be a matter of can he fight the bureaucracy to get policies done. It's now a matter of will the policies he selects actually accomplish what he intends them to accomplish. I think that if he follows the advice of that people like David Atkinson were putting out there from the very beginning, which is you can get that productivity by engaging in the appropriate reforms, expanding the size of companies, cutting regulatory red tape, cutting unnecessary taxation on medium-sized companies, and incentivizing the creation of more medium-sized companies through expansion, then he can get out of the rut. Japan can get out of the rut and recover.
Okay, how do you guys think that Shinzo has done over the past 8 years?
Shinzo Abe, this is my view of it. I mean, obviously Anthony and Chris, I'm sure would want to chime in on this as well. But I mean, I think Shinzo Abe has done the best he could have done, given his constant state of poor health in the first place, that has been relentlessly concealed throughout the time.
It's still not as bad as Bolsonaro's.
Or yeah, I suppose not as bad as Bolsonaro, but I think Abe has done the best that he could conceivably have done, and he basically created the platform upon which Yoshihide Suga can now stand.
Yeah, so, I think he's definitely made Japan into. Not to say that Japan wasn't economically strong 8 years ago, because it most definitely was, but I think that he's definitely made it stronger in the long term, especially with China on an acute rise, like unprecedented over the past 10 years. And so I think definitely if we want to contain China, and so I guess I'm moving a little more into the geopolitics of the area, but we need a strong Japan. We need a strong Japan and a strong India. And I think he's done good for prepping Japan to take on that sort of regional hegemonic role.
I mean, to sort of put a little slight modifier on that, I think from the Japanese perspective, they would not use the word containment to describe what they are presently doing. They would see it shaping the rise in a way that is not adversarial to themselves.
And I think that I mean, honestly, so this might be a bit of a controversial take, but I think at this point, you could pretty much consider Japan a Western democracy in a lot of ways. And I think that they kind of have taken a lot of like they've taken a lot of the mechanisms of Western democracy, kind of applied it to
I wouldn't go
themselves.
as far as to say it is.
That's because the United States literally imposed it upon them at the end of World War II. So
I wouldn't
I
even
mean, they were already Westernizing by the Meiji Restoration.
Yes, first that, but I would say that in terms of the imposition thing, I mean, Japan had already chosen to adopt the Diet system from Germany in the first place.
They were essentially fascist. They were essentially fascist during.
I don't mean like that. I mean in terms of like how West Germany had the Bundestag. Japan from the very start had a Diet system which was based on copying Germany's governmental structure, right? So there is that similarity between how these two systems work. So I suppose you could say that, but I mean, in terms of being a Western liberal democracy, I would not categorize Japan as a Western liberal democracy. I would categorize Japan as a I mean, and this is again real talk, an ethnic democracy, much like how South Korea is an ethnic democracy. If you look at the content of speeches and so on in the two countries, you can often find the telltale signs that this is not a liberal democracy.
Sorry.
Would you consider Israel an ethnic democracy?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I wouldn't really consider. So I'm pro-Israel, but I would not necessarily consider Israel a democracy. I just think there's.
No, I mean, the reason I would say it is a democracy, although it is an ethnic democracy, is because the instruments of voting are still taking place. The instruments of democratic elections are taking place, but they're taking place not for the purpose explicitly of upholding liberal values per se, but for the purpose of upholding the existence of a particular demographic.
Fair enough. Okay, I see what you mean.
So, but my point about Japan, though, is that after World War II, we essentially had to get rid of the fascists who essentially pulled us into World War II, and a part of that was essentially doing what we did to Afghanistan quite recently, which was essentially writing a new constitution that would emulate American republicanism for Japan. Of course, with their circumstance, like for all intents and purposes. Wait, does Japan still have an emperor?
Of course.
It does still have an emperor.
But they're not really an empire.
So they're a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah, Japan is a constitutional monarchy, but this is exactly why I said what I said. But I mean, even if you made the comparison with South Korea, which is a constitutional republic, even then, if you look at the content of the way that Koreans speak about their own country inside the institutions, it reveals the existence of the ethnic democracy there as well. Because when you hear South Korean politicians talk about the Korean nation, what do? They talk about the inalienable rights of the people, yes, but then they also talk about built on the bone and blood of the sacrifice of blah blah blah. Almost every one of their speeches contains either the word bone or blood. You will never.
I see what you mean now.
You will never find that in North America.
No, I agree. I actually agree with that, Ray. Because I was getting confused a bit with the ethnic democracy classification. Then I'm like thinking to myself, wait a minute, that actually does make sense. That's why it's true. It's applicable also to Israel as well.
Yeah, and it would be applicable to Israel. I don't mean that in a negative sense, obviously, because I mean these
it's a neutral sense,
right? I mean, truly in a neutral sense. Like when Benjamin Netanyahu talks about his country, like I don't get the impression he's talking about it as an abstract system he is attempting to uphold.
He's talking about the nation.
Indeed, he's talking about a specific group of people.
Talking about the Jew. I mean, I don't even think there's necessarily anything wrong with that per se, but at the same time, like I don't know, I'm kind of when it comes to Israel, I have very mixed feelings as a realist, like in the Henry Kissinger tradition. I think that we need to support Israel for the sake of realpolitik. However, I do think that there are, and I do think that the Jewish people, they have a right to they have a right to exist as a nation. But at the same time, the government of Israel doesn't necessarily treat Palestinians the best, and the Palestinians have been there for a while. Yet I still feel like morally speaking, there needs to be a Jewish state still. And it's just
you support a two-state solution to that issue.
I mean maybe. Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine.
I think almost all of the people in this conversation support a two-state solution.
Yeah, but like I mean, even the original,
We do not have
like Zionism was originally.
We do not have Kevin Castle here because he's probably the only one we know who supports a one-state solution.
That's
And
because he has gone off. He has moved out of the center ground.
Dude, no,
I
listen.
don't know where he's gone.
Kevin supports.
He's like a Ben Shapiro.
Israel.
He's basically Ben Shapiro at this point.
Yeah, but he supports the greater Israel. So he essentially,
Which is like a meme.
yeah.
I mean, he is a meme. He's a meme in libertarian circles.
Well, he's
Can we
not
just like
libertarian.
direct this back onto the topic?
Yeah, we shouldn't talk about a person who isn't here at the moment, though.
So,
I mean, fair enough. But I did want to say
So-
one last thing about Palestine, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead.
I wanted to, so I actually agree with damn it. You literally just said your name. Politicrat, my apology.
Yes.
It can be democratic.
Two states.
John Kerry. Yeah, on the two-state solution, John Kerry once said that, he said this: "Today there are a similar number of Jews and Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They have a choice. They can choose to live together in one state, or they can separate into two states. But here is a fundamental reality.
I like
If the
the
choice
idea of them
One
sharing a
state can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both,
Yeah,
and it won't ever be at peace.
exactly.
Moreover, the
No, that is.
Jews will never
I
fully
like that
realize
quote.
their vast potential in a homeland of their own."
I mean,
The
Yeah,
one- the
okay.
one-
John Kerry was pretty
problem-
base.
The one problem, though, with a two-state solution, though, I'd say, I'm sorry to keep this off. Sorry to keep this like off topic
Get
here,
to the
but
point.
I think the one problem with the two-state solution is that inevitably a Palestinian state will ultimately end up being a vassal of Iran.
I'm not even going to address that, but I think, Ray, can we go back onto what list of questions that we want to go? Because we have to get through this.
I was just using that as one example of the distinction between ethnic democracy.
Yeah, we got way too sidetracked.
I mean, another example which I would have used could have been Kosovo, for example. Like I would regard
Oh,
Kosovo
yeah.
as being
Okay.
certainly an ethnic democracy, which of course needed to exist because of the persecution which had been levied against it previously, and you know it's cut out as like a place where ethnic Albanians live, right? So when they cast their ballots, they're not casting them solely because they believe liberal democracy is awesome, but also because they support ethnic Albanians not being persecuted by Serbian fascists. So
Yeah.
I remember in The End of History by Fukuyama, he said by the standards of liberal democracy that Japan is more Japan and South Korea is more authoritarian.
I'm actually holding it right now.
Holding what?
No, that Fukuyama End of History. I have a book. I have a very conveniently placed bookshelf under my desk. So
that is
course
great.
you do.
what do you remember what chapter it was? Because I can find it.
Don't remember, but it's probably. I have to get the book because I do remember him.
Wait, was it The Rise of Bulgaria? Or
Maybe.
Vacation in Bulgaria?
Maybe.
Okay,
I
just
do
getting
have
to
one
the point
question
of what
for
you
you,
were
though.
saying.
It probably doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Never mind.
We do need to get back on point there, but I'll just say on Francis Fukuyama since his name came up. Ask me about this later, guys, about that funny image where it has Francis Fukuyama and both his eyes are glowing red, and then it has at the bottom like a fake news chyron, and it says Francis Fukuyama announces History 2.0.
Wait, is it possible for an ethnic democracy to also simultaneously be a liberal democracy? Can you have both?
I'd say
I mean,
Japan in a lot of ways.
I mean, I guess you could, but and I mean, people usually regard having like that ethnic democracy component in there as being a thing that lessens the amount of liberalism which is found to exist in that mixture.
I mean, in the economic sense, Japan is a liberal democracy.
In the economic sense, and yeah, I guess it's definitely running on the principles of it's definitely running on liberal economics, if you like, yeah. But that could be applied in a really weird way though, because I mean, you could also then end up claiming that Vietnam is running on liberal. It's technically quote unquote liberal.
I mean,
right?
when I think of liberalism, personally, I see it as fundamentally an economic ideology, as opposed to I mean, but then liberalism as a tradition, though, is more abstract than that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean by that. When people say liberal democracy, I usually interpret that to mean the Western tradition proceeding from Greco-Roman thought through to the development of the liberal revolutions of 1848. And so there's a lot of countries that never went through that particular process, and so they're not really doing it. They're just copying some aspects of what was developed in terms of the institutions.
Yeah.
So, for example,
Okay.
like Korea and Japan, to use those two again, I mean, I don't think Japan will ever fully understand what it would be, what it would have been like to have gone through that particular, and that sort of very, very unique sequence of events that Western Europe went through to arrive at the position of having a parliament and having.
I kind of
So,
disagree with.
I-
I kind of disagree with that a little bit, but I see where you're coming from that. Like,
So,
And so,
if I'm,
and so while
if
we
I'm
may
on-
adopt these things, we didn't. What's the word for it? We didn't do the homework to get there. If that makes sense, we did something else to arrive at that position.
they didn't show their work.
so,
We didn't show our work. We basically just came along at the Meiji Restoration, and we're like, yeah, this looks like an interesting institution that can mediate between different interests in a society. Let's just take that, right? So that's a different path to get there from how the people who originally made that got there.
Is it possible that maybe a lot of that could be because Japan, at least comparatively to China, Japan has always been historically slightly more individualist than China, which is fundamentally collectivist on every level from a cultural, traditional perspective. But why it's been easier for them to adopt some aspects of liberalism as opposed to China?
I'm not entirely sure, because I mean, China did have Chinese liberalism at the dawn of their republic in 1911. So I mean,
But that failed. That's the thing. That
I
completely
do
failed.
see some politicrat. I actually do see some truth to that, though, because, for example, Japan has intellectual property laws. Because
And have for hundreds of years.
with China, with China, however, the reason they don't have intellectual property rights is because they essentially believe that every creative endeavor should be treated as part of the collective imagination.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I had back in.
I thought that was a more recent innovation they came up with in the 1970s.
No, I think that's been.
I mean, basically, we see. So I think we can all agree Xi Jinping currently holds the mandate of heaven, obviously.
LOL.
I mean, no, I'm not even joking. I mean, they still see it like that. They just have different terms to apply it. Like
I'm not
communism
sure,
and
I am not sure that they would like that, though. And the reason I'll say is this, is because when Mao Zedong carried out the Cultural Revolution during the 1960s/1970s, the explicit purpose of it was to prevent that kind of thinking from making a return. So I think that if you were to ask Xi Jinping himself whether he thinks that he's operating in a sort of a structured system in which some people have knowledge and others do not, he would very strongly want to rebut that, because he wouldn't want to cast himself in that kind of role. Like, I mean, even if he's accidentally doing it and he's unaware of the fact that he's doing it, he himself would not have the consciousness of doing it, because otherwise he would be constantly living in a hypocrisy. So I don't think that he would think that.
But again, I would say that just to on this point,
I think it was his way of intentionally trying to legitimize the fact that he was holding the mandate of heaven.
yeah. Thanks for interrupting.
Well, no, I'm
But,
sorry. I was actually on mute and I was like trying to talk, but then I realized.
No. I think we do need to, like. It seems that we're like going off on other tangents and that. So
Yeah,
I
we
just
have
we
to
need
see
to
this
really
happen
get
for a
back
while.
onto course and stuff.
Okay, so the last point on this LDP election thing that we were touching on, and I think in the future we should do like a whole thing on just that, on just that, in order to cover it, because obviously this is not supposed to be comprehensive anyway. We're just mentioning it. So I think the last point on the Japan LDP election list would be the issue of the Japan-China reset, which is still something which is apparently on the list. So looking at the way that things have been performing so far, and the way that the Japanese government has been dealing with China up until this point, this Japan-China reset, which they are talking about, seems to be an attempt, and I'm sure that many of you on this panel have heard me say this before, seems to be an attempt by Japan to find itself a strange middle ground between the United States and China on the issue of, on the one hand, putting up a firm resistance against Chinese encroachment in the South China Sea, while at the same time continuing to allow China essentially to save face or to essentially get on with its business in Central Asia and in other parts of Asia that are not directly facing Japanese territory. So, and the reason for this is obviously clear, because obviously Japan has deep investments in Chinese infrastructure, and there's supposed to be a free trade deal involving Japanese investment into Chinese service sector, and there's also the deep supply chains which seem to cover the whole of East Asia, which Japan is obviously a part of, and so Japan doesn't want to literally cut off China. And so finding that middle ground is going to be probably one of the biggest problems that Yoshihide Suga is going to be faced with going into this premiership. I mean, especially when you consider that the American election is coming up soon. So after November, I think the Japanese government will be fully aware of which governments they're going to have to deal with in the United States in order to find this middle ground. And I think it's going to be more difficult to find that middle ground if you're dealing with a Donald Trump presidency than if you're dealing with a Biden presidency. And the reason for that is quite obvious, because the Donald Trump presidency is very demanding and will basically come to you and will try to tell you what you need to do on your own foreign policy. Whereas I think the Biden presidency, while it is still going to obviously be antagonistic toward Chinese expansion, quote unquote expansion, depending on how you want to term it. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone to represent China on the panel who can push back on me when I'm saying this, but so that's why I'm trying to be as measured as possible. Obviously, under Joseph Biden, I think that his methods will be slightly less confrontational, and so Japan may find that one easier to navigate. Obviously, if anyone in the audience is from People's Republic of China and wants to push back on anything we've said here today, feel free to obviously shoot me a line. I have no problem with having a conversation with you guys if you're out there.
Do you think Biden will pursue Obama's multilateral strategy, such as TPP and forming and basically maintaining their military alliances with important strategic nations?
Oh, that is a beautiful question. No, good. Thank you for asking me that question.
I think so. Personally, I think so.
So yes, I mean, I agree with Politicrat. I mean, I think that Joseph Biden would probably want to have a conversation about re-entering the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, particularly since he was part of the government that proposed that such a thing should exist in the first place. So I don't know how that. But they would have to be takers this time around, though, because now they'd be entering after the deal has already been signed.
So, what do you think of Obama's pivot to Asia? Do you think that was a smart and calculated maneuver at the time?
I think so. I actually think so.
Yes and no. Like, if he had pivoted to Asia while not creating a gigantic mess in the Middle East, then sure. But you can't. I mean, me and Anthony have had this argument before, so I'm sure he'll chime in on this. But I kind of feel like the United States can't do more than one thing at the same time.
That was sort of the point, though. Obama was deprioritizing the Middle East to focus on Asia because he felt like Asia was.
He couldn't get his last foot because he's got 2 feet and he couldn't get the left foot out of the Middle East, even though he was stepping toward East Asia. He couldn't get it done because he got dragged back in again. It's kind of like The Godfather, but with sand, right? Wow. Trying to get out, and they just keep.
That's a good way of putting it.
Can I just interject here and just say that I'm of the position that you can do both, and that this whole false dichotomy that it's either the Middle East or Asia, I think is just as I said before, it's false. I think you could do both. I just think that disagree.
I kind of disagree. I mean, I get where you're coming from, Anthony, but I kind of see that if you had to compare the severity of the two, I honestly think that what is currently going on in Southeast Asia, that is a bit, or not South, just Asia in general, is sort of more critical in the long term. I feel like in a lot of ways things are kind of dying down in the Middle East. I mean, not 100%, of course, but I feel like it's just in terms of how relevant it is on a world scale, it's sort of starting to contract, whereas Asia, it's starting to affect the world more.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Many scholars.
To be fair, I'll put the counter argument to my own self, to myself as well, and I'll say that yes, it may be the case that the Middle East problems may begin to sort of pseudo solve themselves, in the sense that like you can't break Syria more than it's already broken. So there's nowhere but up for that. And then if you look at Libya, for example, I was seeing a headline and an article which is on my reading list that I haven't actually finished reading yet, I will confess, which says that Turkey's actions in Libya have now led to France and Italy reaching some kind of strange accommodation with each other, in which they will no longer, apparently, be functioning so much as rivals in that territory anymore. Anyone else hearing that, or was that an opinion that was debunked?
I'll say that when it comes to Libya, especially because of Turkey's intervention into Syria and intervention to the Libyan conflict through use of mercenaries and through the backing of the GNA, and also its military presence in places like Sirte. What worries France, for example, is that Turkey will have access to another main refugee pathway into Europe. And for France, for example, France doesn't want that to occur because that gives essentially Turkey, leverage or blackmailing leverage over the EU. So because it always does this love-hate relationship with the EU, where it blackmails the EU and
they want to join, but they don't. But they hate they don't like the EU, but they want to join. Basically, I feel like they're just like the kid who's excluded from the kid that's like excluded from the reindeer games.
Yeah,
but that leads then to France, for example, back in the the Libyan National Army and Haftar. By the way, that backing of the LNA actually goes before, of course. Now it goes back to the days where the LNA as well as Haftar were just a force fighting essentially ISIS before they sort of like went to war with with the GNA. So that's sort of like France's whole machinations is to stop Turkey being aggressive in those areas and having sort of like a little leverage over Europe, but also to stop its aggression, for example, in the Mediterranean with the oil gas pipeline deals and the water disputes that are going on between Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, Libya, and of course Turkey. But yeah. Don't want to go too much.
They never let poor Turkey play in any EU games.
One thing I'll always say to the audience, like if you want to know on Middle East issues, on Middle East and North Africa, like Anthony is literally the guy to go to because he is how can I put this? He is one of the few people on this panel who is physically embedded for a little while. I won't be going too far for me to say it was physically embedded, right?
Well, I mean, I was there for like just over a month, and then I went to Iraq and to go. So I'm going to go there again more, at least when all this COVID thing is done, dusted. But my whole shtick is that I'm a writer for the Jerusalem Post, so I contribute stuff for the Jerusalem Post, and I've written about the Middle East for the last 4 to 5 years, predominantly. And I focus on sort of, for example, Kurdish and Yazidi minority rights. So that's like my little shtick, you could say. So conflicts like the Syrian conflict or even the Iraqi civil war and Libya, or not Libya too much, but usually it's just Syria. That's kind of like my main little focus. So that's why I'm a little bit interested in that region in general. Yeah. So I guess that's where my bias is. I guess when I say that, you don't need to leave it yet, people.
Yeah. I can understand where you're coming from on that too. One thing I'll say to you on the Libya thing before we go to the next topic then, basically on this Libya thing, do you think that Macron still has the awareness that the immigration crisis is directly related to his perceived legitimacy in his own country? Because I've seen his activities in Mali, was it Mali or somewhere else, where he negotiated between two different governments to have the enforcement.
I think it was Ghana. I'm pretty sure it was Ghana.
It was somewhere.
I'm pretty sure it was Ghana.
Yeah, you said it was Ghana, but I don't think it was a West African country.
Are you sure?
I mean, one of the migration routes.
It could be Mali or Chad, but because Mali recently had a coup.
Yeah, it wasn't Mali.
Mali recently had a coup. So, but anyway, I mean, I would say that
it was Niger.
Oh, sorry, I forgot that. Oh, this is what I mean. I forget these things.
I forgot that was even a country.
And so basically Macron went there and had some weird conversation with people, and suddenly the borders started getting shut down. So the people who were migrating for economic reasons were no longer actually reaching Libya to make the transit in the first place. Where do you guys feel about, I know this is literally off topic, but how do you guys feel about Macron and the clarity that he brings to the way that he is governing right now? Because a lot of people are down on him, but I kind of feel like he knows what he is doing, even if the things he is doing are not always
Macron and Johnson are the only two Western leaders that I remotely like currently.
Well, I just want to say that in regards to Macron's policies, I mean, with Macron, he actually is a true heart, honest to God, liberal internationalist in the sense that he believes in multilateralism. He believes in this kind of like Europeanism as well, like this building of the European identity and the building of the EU, especially in the strengthening of the EU. For him, for example, he's sort of re-engaged with the former France Africa, sort of former French colonies within North Africa. So that's why, for example, he's gone to these countries and sort of like he went all the way to actually, I think it was New Caledonia, or I can't remember what the country is near off the coast of New Zealand that actually Chris was talking about earlier. I can't remember what he actually said.
Yeah, no,
but
it's New Caledonia.
Yeah, I was right already. But literally, Macron's trying to reinvigorate the French population over there and trying to restore, like almost like a French foot in the Middle East and the North African region to build this like kind of like this universal, like kind of like French. I don't know what to call it, Frenchism or like sorry.
A francophone community.
The new French Empire.
Well, not Napoleon, but yeah.
Or you can call it Francosphere. Francosphere also
So,
Francosphere. The Francosphere.
I mean, would it be accurate to say it's just basically broadly speaking, a community of French-speaking people, international?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely this is why I said there's definitely this liberal internationalism, multilateralism, and Europeanism that you're seeing with Macron, and I think that's good. I mean, it doesn't sort of like excuse everything he's doing internally because like he still is kind of cracking down on protests within his own country. But I would say that's like the approach he's taking towards Africa does align with what you just said, Ray, I guess.
Okay, so it's basically. I
got one last question about Asia.
Okay, yeah, I'm tying it back to there now. So tell me if my question is going to be literally the same as yours. Macron's position with regards to conversations with Yoshihide Suga in the future, which is that Japan was looking to France for some kind of, let's say, joint patrolling alliance business, semi-alliance business, where French warships would apparently be inside the South China Sea alongside Japanese ones in order to basically keep a watch out so that no one on the mainland of China decides to get, a little bit overeager. Do you guys think that that's something that will actually play out? Like, is it something that Macron could conceivably do and it would not be seen as him interfering in a place he shouldn't be?
That's very old school. That's like going back to like what France and Japan's original relationship was. That was their first relationship. They did that sort of stuff back in the Meiji.
So, do you think Asia is you think Asia's geopolitical situation is similar to Europe before World War I, or as scholars like to put it, you think Asia is in a Thucydides trap, so to speak?
Okay, well, for the audience, explain the Thucydides trap so that basically people don't know what we're talking about.
Okay, Thucydides is a historian. Well, one of the first historians who wrote about the Peloponnesian War, and one of his famous maxim is it was the rise of Sparta that incurred the fear of Athens to wage war. So, you think the rise of China will eventually cause or spark a major war to happen?
Fun fact: I'm holding Thucydides right here too.
Yeah, I mean the danger of this should not be excluded. I mean, it is always possible that there is indeed a pre-World War I type situation that's developing, and we need to be conscious of that. And this is part of why I've been so unhappy with the behavior that the Trump administration has shown, particularly statements made by Mike Pompeo and so on, where they're taking liberties and they're saying things that cautious and responsible statesmen should not be saying at this time in history. People need to be extremely careful because the amount of damage that could be done through the sparking of some kind of conflict would be I think greater than the world economy is prepared to sustain. Like, no one has even priced that in as like a thing that could happen. It would be so sudden. It would be as dramatic as World War I probably was. So we need to really make sure that we avoid that. And I think that everyone fundamentally in the region wants to avoid that kind of situation. But as often is the case, people end up sleepwalking into these kind of situations, and you kind of wake up from the nightmare only to realize you're actually in the nightmare.
Right. So that means you're on the you're essentially sort of in the middle between politicrats' perspective on China and Henry Kissinger's perspective on China, which is essentially the U.S. and Chinese should work together to essentially dominate the world.
I would not use the phrase "dominate the world." Obviously, I'm sure.
I know. I'm just using.
I know.
Well,
I mean, it's very similar to what Zbigniew Brzezinski said as well, which is that there needs to be a semi-accommodationist arrangement between the United States and China, so that they can cooperate on shared goals while simultaneously not being unreasonable to each other on the things they don't share ideas on.
I think China is going to. I think China is probably. China is a long-term threat. I do agree, but I don't think it is going to exist in the same manner in which it currently exists within the next 200 years. I think that eventually it is doomed to balkanize, just as nations historically tend to do.
Well,
it might enter another warring states period potentially.
I mean, the world cannot afford to have that kind of implosion of a major productive state happen.
I think it's going to happen though.
Particularly given the amount of infrastructure which is being constructed there, the amount of time and effort which has been put into building these supply chains and so on.
I don't hope that happens, but I can't see anything else happening over the course of the next
pandemic. My approach to the approach that I advocated for China is to how I view Israel now. So you work with the Chinese when you do have shared goals or interests, but when they do something stupid like their adventures in the South China Sea, you need to put your foot down. So you need to put they're doing something stupid.
Well, can I just interject over here, because it sounds like you guys are taking up oxygen, but I would want to just say that I'm all for accommodating China, but we can't keep doing this whole reset where we say, okay, let's reset again with China and let's see if things work out this way. It's not working at the moment. This whole kind of accommodation for China didn't work with Kissinger. And
it did work.
No. I would say it didn't work.
I'm saying it should not be across the board accommodation. Don't get me wrong.
No. Can I just finish my point what I was going to say? My whole thing is that its actions in the South China Sea need to be curtailed. Its claims over Taiwan need to be curtailed. And those are just base things that should be prerequisites for any future engagement. Because at the end of the day, for example, for me, I have a bias. I would love to see the CCP fall. I really would love to see the whole of China democratize effectively and actually empower its minorities, empower its people. Of course, there's limits to that. My whole point is that we can't simply keep resetting and sort of accommodating for China, because guess what? China's not going to respect that. It's not going to respect that. It has clearly an expansionist vision that it's trying to pursue. Maybe not directly in terms of let's annex this territory, annex that territory, but definitely economic expansion, and definitely it is posing a destabilizing factor to neighbors such as Taiwan, Japan, Malaysia, Philippines when it comes to South China Sea, especially in the 9-dash line.
Yeah, especially the Philippines. I can't speak for Malaysia, but at least in the Philippines, Duterte is capitulating to China in really problematic ways, where he's basically saying oh, I'm not going to work with our university to fight COVID. I'm going to go with the Chinese. Even though the University of the Philippines is their national university, it's the number one training center for doctors in the Philippines, you would think that you would want to use your number one resource rather than relying on China.
Well, I mean, the thing that I would say on this is I think my position is closer to the one that Zbigniew Brzezinski held in the year 2017, and of course in all years prior to that. Which is you've got to look at where we are in terms of the pivot space, using the same framework that Mackinder gifted the world with in terms of there being a pivot space and there being the outer rim and so on. So we are all the countries in the outer rim at this point, right? And they happen to be right next to the pivot space. And so who do we want to control the pivot space? People who make things that we want to buy, or people who just create nothing?
Who's going to control the world island then?
well, not control the world island, but rather like who do we favor to at least gain territory in terms of influence in Central Asia? So we all know that any gains made by China in the Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia and across into South Asia are going to be at Russia's expense. So given that we don't like Russia because they create nothing they own, why should we not essentially allow them to have their Belt and Road Initiative? Because we're not going to be in a situation where we can directly challenge China for control of their own territory. The last time we tried to directly challenge China for control of its own territory, that was 1937, and I think we all know how that ended up. Because as soon as one person tries to enter Chinese territory in order to create a system of meaningful order in that location, all of the other powers then immediately work on sabotaging you. So.
Can I just
to expand this lesson? The Empire of Japan entered the Chinese mainland in 1930. Well, entered. It was already there, but you know what I mean. Began to expand more in the Chinese mainland in 1937 with the goal of basically trying to control the eastern seaboard and controlling parts of the interior of the country. What did the United States proceed to immediately do upon realizing Japan was doing this? They immediately assessed that, this could result in a hegemon emerging in the location. So now we're going to sabotage. So we all know that it's extremely difficult for any one person who is not China to control China because of the fact that everyone else who is not doing that controlling will try to sabotage you. So it would be far better to just leave them alone to their own devices, allow them to develop their own system within conceivable limits, and so long as they obviously abide by the constraints of the UN Charter, and sort of guard against incursions in the South China Sea, protect Taiwan from any incursions and any bad ideas they may have. But with regards to everything else, I don't see why we shouldn't be able to arrive at what I would refer to as a semi-accommodationist position with them.
I've got to push back on some of the stuff. First and foremost, now you may say that China is trying to curtail Russia, but Russia and China are working together in a lot of different areas, whether it be in, for example, Iran or even in the East. I know now you say that China's trying to quote undermine.
Indeed, yes.
Russia, but my whole contention is this: that autocratic regimes, or like other autocratic regimes, now not all the time. May I just say, not all the time. Okay, Volt. Okay, can I just say, Volt? If you're going to say stuff, vocalize it. Okay, if you're going to make an argument, vocalize it. Sorry. But I was just saying, the second thing is that they're not really adhering to the UN Charter when they're doing gross human rights violations, whether it be in Xinjiang or in Tibet. And they also are, as I said before, are a destabilizing factor to neighbors within the South China Sea. So if they were not doing this kind of stuff, I would be all on board. I mean, I'm not against, like, as we said, Singapore is technically, hold on. Singapore is technically an autocratic regime, okay? And we don't have a fuss about that because guess what? It doesn't, for example, destabilize or try to destabilize local neighbors or try to make a big fuss around
respects it does. I'll point out one.
Not at the same extent as China. I'm not going to give you.
I know, but just very briefly, I'll point out that Singapore frequently has acted as a kind of like banking money laundering affair for Myanmar during the time that you all had Myanmar under sanctions, but no one seemed to call them out on that for some reason.
Well, the thing is that what my whole thing is it's possible, for example, to contain countries like, to address countries like Russia, to address countries like China, to address the gross human rights violations by the Myanmar government against the Rohingya people. It's possible to do all those things. They're not like mutually exclusive. I know you say that there's a limited amount of resources.
Yes, but there's the amount of resources you can expend on any one thing. So you have to be extremely strategic in how you apply this force.
But that doesn't mean necessarily that you completely say, okay, you know what, we're going to leave China over there to do its thing. We're going to just focus on Russia and pretend as if China's not a thing over there in the East over there. That will work out fine.
I wasn't saying that you don't focus on China at all, because I was just saying that in the South China Sea, that is the location that we need to be most furious about protecting the fundamental positions that we hold there, as opposed to going on a massive foray into like every internal dispute that they have within their mainland territory that is not even physically connected to us.
I'll concede this. I'll concede this to you, right? I'll concede that, okay, maybe if we're talking about purely, if we're going to get rid of the whole morality thing or whole moral humanitarian perspective, we just put that on the shelf for a bit. From a geostrategic point of view, the fact is, okay, if there are internal machinations, let's pretend that they don't exist for a moment. The South China Sea, as I mentioned before, there's aggression in the South China Sea, and China's not respecting other sovereign nations around it in that area. So how can we expect to engage with an actor, for example, who doesn't have? Well, actually, I'm going to actually hold myself off over there before getting myself into a little trap. But I would just say that we need to address what China's doing in the South China Sea, the destabilization is doing over there, and it needs to, in my opinion, needs to renounce its claims on Taiwan and actually acknowledge Taiwan as a state, as well as do a bunch of other things before I am happy with going back and do the whole appeasement thing, all about like, trying to reproach it and do the whole, how can we say, reproachment that Kissinger went on with, that has sort of empowered, you could say, the PRC and just allowed the PRC to keep going as it is.
I mean, me and you partly agree on this. I mean, in terms of, there's also such a thing as diplomatic bandwidth, right? So, I mean, if we had a certain amount of diplomatic bandwidth, I mean, I would say that I would be happy to expend lots of diplomatic bandwidth on putting China into a position where they would have to renounce the nonsense they've been saying about Taiwan and renounce the 9-dash line. I would like to use almost all of the diplomatic bandwidth on that, and like less diplomatic bandwidth on, say, I don't know, is China really building the maximum number of houses for the Yi ethnic group that they should be getting at the moment? Like, that's like an internal issue for them to sort out politically among themselves, not for us to come in there and say, okay, well, we would be able to govern your country better than you can.
Well, we must be careful. Well, we must just to make a last point of this, because I don't want to take up too much oxygen.
I just want to add one other thing as well. I mean, from the perspective of Japan, it would be extremely rich, and I say this with obviously as much measuredness as I can here. Like, it would be extremely rich. I'm sure they would laugh if it were Japan to deliver this lecture to them, given that the last time that we were there, that did not play out very well for anyone concerned, right? We can't be able to deliver that lecture to them.
Okay.
But before we move on to the next topic, my apologies for interrupting.
Another thing that I wanted to say as well, which is that we do need to sometimes put ourselves in their shoes and imagine how they would react, how we would react if we were them in this kind of situation. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, we, and by we I mean basically Japan, other Western countries, Australia, Indonesia, United States, etc., are driving ships up and down in the South China Sea, coming right up next to the side of their country on a consistent basis. Imagine if that were happening to the United States, for example. Like, imagine if, like, California, there was just Chinese submarines appearing off California once a week. People just saluting on the decks. You guys would be freaking pissed after a while.
Well, that actually does happen though, but that's a completely different thing though.
Well,
I know what Ray's talking about.
This is why I say there needs to be a semi-accommodative stance here, that we need to try to work out a deal with them of, okay, maybe we could all stop antagonizing each other if they agree to renounce the 9-dash line and we agree to stop doing the things that we're presently doing that are aggravating them within reason. In other words, draw up something that is...
I can get behind.
But the thing is, though, is that you have to be very careful with that, because in many cases, I tend to have like a law and order perspective on international relations, and obviously we're not going to get into this particular topic related to China today, but maybe another time. But like, what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghurs, for example, is indefensible. And if we excuse it, if we just say, well, it's none of our business because we don't want a hostile relationship with China, you essentially sent a message to other authoritarians and terrorists that it's perfectly okay to engage in genocidal activity. Now, I'm going to wait for the investigation, of course, that Macron said.
That's what I was going to say. There needs to be a UN investigation of that before we draw.
I know, but if it was a genocide, then we need to support efforts to stop it, such as sanctions. But also, we can't just say, well, we don't want to create further hostility, so we're just going to let you violate human rights en masse like that. No, because then you send a message to other authoritarians that's perfectly okay to conduct genocide, and that leads to that's just not sustainable in the long run. That's why I disagree.
To put a bow on it, I would meet you halfway there then, Coronis, and say that yes, if it is determined that a state that we're trying to not antagonize happens to actually be committing a human rights violation that fundamentally violates the UN Charter, then at that point it is impossible for us to ignore it, and I would agree that it would have to be stopped.
Can I
do you
just say
think that the Trump administration effectively ended the...
Please finish what
Hold on, let Anthony go first.
Fuck's sake. Sorry about that. But I just want to make a quick point on this. In terms of the 9-dash line, China is technically violating international law on the 9-line in the South China Sea. And the second thing, just to say, the reason why, for example, there's naval vessels that go up and down the South China Sea and near the place like Taiwan is for Taiwan's defense as well. So just those are the only things I'm going to say.
I agree that is how we perceive it. But I'm just putting out there that we need to sometimes remember that they may be perceiving this in a completely different way than we are. And we need to explain to them.
They are also a fascist police state. So the media could be spinning it they're definitely spinning it completely different in China. Like when these things happen.
Yeah, there may even be instances, where the country that you're in tension with may have a media that is actually depicting your activities in ways that are different from how you would perceive them, and so all of that needs to be taken into account, so you don't end up with accidental escalation.
And then because China's a police state, is like a one-party police state, they're definitely spinning it even more than regular bias.
But I will let this specify something very quickly, if that's okay. If it did turn out, I'll let you go next, Volt. But if it did turn out that the Uyghurs were being subject to a genocide, then I would not support a military occupation of Xinjiang. I would not support that. Like in the case of Rwanda, for example.
I interpreted your statements as meaning that you would support sanctions and other deterring efforts.
Yeah. Because like in cases like Rwanda, you could have easily sent the military into Rwanda and stopped the genocide. Like you could have done that because Rwanda's a weak state, but China is a superpower, and a military occupation of a province is just batshit insane. I would not support that. I just want to clarify that because I'm sure someone would be like, "Well, you're a hawk, so you probably support war with China over the Uyghur genocide." No, I don't. I just want to specify that very.
Yeah. So, obviously, if anyone tries to sort of negatively clip you after this to make it like you said something you didn't say, obviously, we would obviously step up and defend you by pointing back to the audio and say that Coronis didn't actually call for an invasion of anyone.
So, since the Trump
administration, can we take like
do you think
4.5 minutes?
No, before you guys go forward, we did promise that Voltaire is the next person to speak.
Okay. No. Okay. All right.
Why do everyone want to interrupt me, but I can't interrupt anyone else? What was
I know.
that?
I apologize.
Because you always ask questions and don't make any statement. You like ask a question, but don't actually follow up with your own opinion on it. That's why I'm a bit more loose. Sorry, a bit more direct with you, mate.
No, that's the thing. I want to know people. I always ask questions. I just want to know. So I just want to know is what your guys' takes on the Trump administration. Do you think the idea of the responsible stakeholder is over? Do you think it's dead, long gone, and that the United States need to recalibrate its strategy towards China, since the stakeholders idea is in the dustbin right now?
What? I mean, personally, I would be more open to the trade war hypothetically if it were just against China. But he's doing it against our allies too, because he's a fucking idiot.
Wait, what's the stakeholder thing? I don't.
The stakeholder argument. The stakeholder argument is that certain states, such as China, should be brought more into the international system so that they can be induced to act as international stakeholders.
But they don't want to be. I don't think they want to be.
So Ray, would you agree with the? Oh, I'm sorry, Voltaire. Go ahead.
So I guess my idea is that I did agree that incorporating China into the world trading system was a good idea to get them to the whole strategy was to incur a domestic transformation. And back in 1995, there was an article published in the National Interest saying that by 2015, China should be a full-blown democracy due to economic liberation. But
that didn't age well.
Well, that didn't happen, obviously, but I think there is no chance, given Chinese political and cultural tradition, that is not going to be a liberal democracy or any form of democracy. It's always going to be some form of autocracy.
They had a liberal democracy in 1911.
And that failed.
This is why I keep saying, though, that obviously
it didn't really fail.
Yeah.
What happened is that you had a shitty leader take control and make himself an autocrat.
Basically failed. Okay.
You had an autocrat.
I would lean toward what Volt is saying and say that, when you're setting your goals, they need to be realistic ones. Like, realistically, what do you expect from China at the present point in the year 2020, and what can you get? Like, you can't set a goal that is like literally impossible and then be like, oh, well, now we're in a crisis because my impossible goal could not have been reached.
Ray, would you agree, however, would you say for the most part China has abided by the rules of international trade outlined by the World Trade Organization? And if not,
Yes.
would you say that China should abide by those rules and be punished if they don't?
I mean, obviously they should be held to the rules where they apply. But I mean, in terms of like what could have happened, I mean, so far, the behavior so far, it's been so much better than it otherwise could have been. I mean, imagine if they had just never participated and never joined the WTO, and imagine if they never had bothered to enmesh themselves into the global economy. I think their behavior right now would be far more wild if they were less interdependent.
But what about the IP thefts and
the
currency manipulations?
Intellectual property theft. I mean, some of it I'm a little bit ticked off about as well, because I mean, I'm sure you heard the one that was a couple of years ago became all the rage for a hot minute in Japan, where Yamaha had created some kind of like drone control software and some drone designs, and then those exact same designs magically appeared the very same next year in China, and everyone was like, "This is unbelievable! It's literally an exact 100% copy of the invention," right? So I mean, obviously this stuff is quite annoying because people want to be remunerated for the work that they've done, and yet these guys are coming along and stealing your intellectual property, basically. Now, enforcing IP law, this is something where you've got to bring them to the table and make them behave appropriately. And so one of the ways to do this was always to bring China into the RCEP, or try to create a situation in which China will feel like they're induced to submit themselves to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And this is something that has been floated before, the idea of having China join the Trans-Pacific Partnership as the last country to join it, meaning that they would be the rule taker. They would have to follow our rules, otherwise they'll be submitted to the arbitration, and then they'll have to submit to arbitration, and the arbitration will find them to be stealing.
But there's a problem with that. As I mentioned before, the reason why the Chinese don't have intellectual property rights, as we understand it, is because of their culture. So you would also have to implement radical. You have to change their culture so they don't have a collectivist interpretation of intellectual property.
Well, I mean, law has a way of influencing the culture. If they're going to have to sign up to a sequence of trade deals that enshrine these things in law, then they're going to have to translate them down to the local level in order to make sure that people abide by these things appropriately. And
I agree with you for the most part.
I would add to
a lot of the time,
part of the reason why they have had an incentive to ignore intellectual property law in the first place is because they regard themselves as a developing country, and they want to do anything they can to try to actually benefit certain sectors of their economy. But if we present a non-antagonistic face and say, here are the rules, we all need to follow these rules together, and if you guys need something, instead of just copying it from us, why not just buy the property, right? Then we've got at least something to work on, instead of it being like they're in some kind of strange contained zone where there are no rules.
Well,
so engagement is better than disengagement in this case, I think.
So I'm reading an article from the Cato Institute about using the WTO disciplining China, and so far, according to this policy brief, they've been rather compliant with WTO complaints.
Exactly.
Well, the thing I just want to also mention is that this is under the assumption, and I don't know why people are making this assumption. Maybe it's because of what Volt's also read when it comes to that article recently right now, is that people are making the assumption that China's following international law, or should say economic arrangements, because it's somehow basically they genuinely believe in that idea of like
no, they're doing it out of purely self-interest. That's why international law is maintained, because out of great power, self-interest, and egotism.
Can I just say also is that they aren't respecting international law. They don't care about international law. They're only doing the whole WTO because it benefits them at the end of the day as well.
Self-interest.
That's exactly what Volt is saying, though. Isn't every country in the WTO purely because it benefits them to not have these conflicts?
No, I'm talking about not the WTO one thing this. I'm talking about more like the South China Sea and the violation of international law on human rights and all that kind of stuff as well.
Oh, okay. I mean, even
So
although I don't want to sort of end up going down that whole path because it was not an original topic on the list, even though the title now says South China Sea, so we're on it, I guess.
I mean,
But
we're answering random questions at this point, so I mean, let's keep going.
Yeah. After this, in about 2 minutes, we'll go to a break and come back, and we'll proceed down the rest of the prescribed list of topics. But the thing that I would say on that as a balancer would be, yes, I mean, there is, quote, international anarchy in the sense that each state is trying to seek its own self-interest. However, when China violates international law, as annoying as it may be to us, and we need to obviously curb them in these locations, specifically the South China Sea, as annoying as it may be to us, we need to still take into account the fact that everyone else also violates international law a little bit in various areas when they feel
and
like.
Therefore, it's right.
And it's I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that we need to not see it as the end of the entire universe because of that. Like, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because they're in violation sometimes. I mean, the United Kingdom is in violation right now of the EU withdrawal deal that it signed with the European Union. And then when Boris Johnson was asked, do you see yourself as being in violation right now? He said, oh, yes, we're just violating international law in a limited and circumscribed way. That's an actual quote that appeared on international television. We're violating international law in a limited and circumscribed way.
Is a moron.
And everyone's mouth dropped, like literally jaws dropped. There was a brief silence after he said it. It was like, did he actually just say that aloud? The United States, for example, is presently violating international law with regards to how they're operating their ICE detention facilities, right? This is one of those things where, like,
and technically U.S. law too.
Engagement with international institutions because sometimes people violate. No, it's a reason for better engagement, and we need to obviously hold people to account when they violate these things. But we shouldn't disengage from them completely because then that just gives them a license to continue violating even more.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was saying earlier with the whole, if you let one country get away with a genocide, you create an incentive for other dictators to think that they can act however they please with impunity.
Yeah,
that's what I was saying earlier.
So I think
when Bill Clinton refused to militarily intervene in the Rwanda genocide, he essentially told every other dictatorship that has genocidal intentions, it's okay. We're not going to send our military to your doorstep if you decide to kill the men, women, and children you dislike in your country.
And obviously that is extremely bad. And so I think everyone on the panel should be able to agree on the middle ground of basically, if people are being caught doing things that violate international law, it needs to be condemned immediately. And
yeah.
But we should not create these kind of we shouldn't fall into this kind of like, we're so angry with the people who are violating that we disengage from them or cause them to disengage from institutions. Because if they disengage from the institutions that should be holding them to account, the situation can only get worse after that point.
Right, exactly.
It's very might have done a crime and they're in the police station, then the appropriate response would not be to say, well, we think you're really shady, you need to leave the police station right now. No. You need them to be definitely in that police station for a little bit longer, I think.
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, I would agree. You also have to understand that the whole
professional
law is to prevent nationalistic expansionist states like Nazi Germany from rising up, because we want to prevent another world war. That is the entire purpose of international law, and that is why when those violations occur,
and of course the purpose of the United Nations being established 75 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way,
which takes me to another thing as well. I was actually flicking through the speeches, and I'll just say this before we go to break, and then we'll come back and do the other topics, because I'm sure the audience is probably going to be thinking, how have we not gone to the other topics yet? We've only covered 2 things out of this list. On the 75th anniversary, I went through the list of on the first day. I went through the speeches that people were making during the General Assembly debate, and I noticed something very conspicuous. And this is going to be something we'll bring up about Donald Trump later on. Most of the world leaders who came in actually mentioned by name that this was the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations, and that we need to continue to sort of hold to the principles of the UN founders. Right? The only leader that I can recall that did not actually say this was Donald J. Trump. How could that happen? Like, what kind of speech writing is going on there?
I honestly think at times that Donald Trump will choose to, follow the speech writers at times. I don't, because I honestly think that at times he will do it off the cusp, and then at times, he can be stuffed and have someone actually write something for him to say.
Well, didn't we see that in his speech today about the so-called America First healthcare plan? Because during the speech, I noticed that he was mostly reading off the teleprompter, which he mocks Joe Biden for doing, but whatever. He's reading off the teleprompter sometimes, but then he's like, oh yeah, there's something else I wanted to say that the speechwriters didn't account for, so he'll he'll stop reading the teleprompter and then go off an arbitrary tangent, and so I do agree with you, Anthony, that he tends to do a mixture of both. He'll read off the script, and he'll also go off on random tangents in addition to the script.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're often hearing,
honestly, and I do legitimately think that Trump believes in expanding Medicare. Like, I know that, like, you have people on the left who are saying, "Oh, he's trying to destroy Medicare and all that." I think he's going to expand it in his own way. I honestly do think he probably leans a little more left on healthcare than people give him credit for. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, I generally tend to disagree with that position on healthcare. So maybe that explains my bias. But
I mean, I'm biased too because my ideal healthcare system is the Netherlands, which is essentially Obamacare, right?
Really, if Trump expanded Medicare, the only way he could expand it would be just lowering the age. And
I mean, the thing is, the left would still find a reason to spin that though, in the U.S. Like knowing how much they hate Trump. Like I don't like Trump, but like I'm not even going to say the left. I'm going to say the Democrats, the Democratic establishment specifically, is really egregious.
The lowering the age to Medicare would be good. Lowering the age to Medicare would be good, but that's literally all Trump can do. Because I think one problem.
Well, okay, maybe what I should say is protect Medicare. I don't think he's trying to get rid of Medicare.
The problem with Medicare is that it's literally just for old people. Honestly,
well, yeah. I mean, Medicaid.
Trump doesn't. You see, that's the thing.
Trump I should expand and say Medicaid too.
Yeah, Trump doesn't care about Medicaid. He does not care about Medicaid. Honestly, Trump has never even said the word Medicaid once. Anytime he talks about healthcare,
isn't Medicare for the elderly while Medicaid is for the poor?
Yes, Medicaid.
We need to remember Trump is a populist too.
Medicaid is kind of honestly.
We'll see how that plays out.
Honestly, leftists who call Medicare for all infuriate me because you should not be calling it Medicare for all. It should be called Medicaid for all.
Exactly.
Because Medicare doesn't cover dental. Medicare doesn't cover dental. Medicaid does.
What I hate also is when they say, "Oh, like look at the Nordic countries. They have Medicare for all." No, they don't. They don't even have Medicare. That's an American thing.
Well,
maybe that's just me being like
in the Netherlands
for words. Like I know what they mean, but
in the Netherlands they essentially have this sort of weird combination of free market, private insurance companies compete with each other, and a public option that you can buy into. And they also have an individual mandate, so you have to have health insurance in the country, and if you do not have health insurance, you have to buy into the government insurance option, or you have to pay fines that are greater than the cost of the public option.
I like
high quality standards. South Korea has a very similar system too, where almost 80% of the population has private insurance to complement their state insurance. South Korea and the Netherlands have the best healthcare systems, in my opinion.
So I actually kind of like that idea, with the exception of the fine part. But I'd be willing to give that a chance potentially.
So are we going to be on break soon?
We are going to be on break literally now, and then when we come back from the break, we are going to actually go through the next set of topics, and those topics will be, for those of you who are going to be waiting anxiously to find out what those actually are, those would be the content of the Woodward Tapes, the U.S. Supreme Court nomination, and Trump administration trying to bypass election results. So we'll see how that plays out when we get back. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We've come back from our break. The topic section there still says South China Sea, but it needs to be changed. So I'm just going to quickly change that to Woodward Tapes. And the reason why is because we're covering the Woodward Tapes immediately as soon as we're back, which we are. So, unfortunately, Chris has to leave us now because he had a time limit for which he could be here, which is basically 90 minutes, and we've basically hit that mark already. So I'll give him the opportunity to sort of like say what he's say his goodbye, and we will see him again next week.
Yeah. So I don't really have much to say, but I'll see you all next week. Have a good night.
Thanks for joining us, Chris. You've been fantastic.
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope you all will like follow Chris on Twitter and sort of pay attention to the things he's saying, because he's often very on point on a number of developments happening in the United States, and he's also the guy to go to if you want to talk about the Philippines, because he knows their internal politics pretty well. So with that said, we can now pivot toward the Woodward Tapes. So as you all know, Woodward had been having conversations with Donald Trump since, was it January? Since January. And, they were having back and forth. And for some reason, Donald Trump was comfortable with talking to Woodward. And all of these conversations were actually being recorded. So the tapes are now in existence. People can go and listen to those tapes if they want to. There's also a book which he has written, and it all contains, very damning quotations and evidence about things which Donald Trump thought he was doing, and also how he wanted to be perceived when he was doing these things. So two of the top things that come to mind immediately is, first off, the fact that Donald Trump was bragging about the fact that he allegedly helped Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud to avoid scrutiny from the United States Congress. And the second thing he was talking about was his view of the COVID-19 pandemic in the early days of the pandemic, which are now recorded on tape. And I know that Coronis wanted to talk about this. This was a topic that he suggested should be added to the role. So I'll sort of just pass the talking ball to him and have him talk about the COVID-19 pandemic.
Perfect. I did write this down. Can I read it uninterrupted?
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. Okay. So there are reasons earlier this year as to why I believe Trumpists, including the man himself, may have wanted the pandemic to spread, although I'll just say Trump wanted the pandemic to spread. Well, first of all, social distancing is rather difficult in poor communities, and Black and Hispanic communities who still overwhelmingly oppose Trump are proportionally affected by economic inequality. So by allowing the virus to spread, Trump can essentially kill off large chunks of the people who would likely vote against him. Sounds like something Stalin would do, but oh well. Second, metropolitan areas, which are predominantly left-leaning and thus were also disproportionately affected by the disease for reasons axiomatic. Meanwhile, at least until fairly recently, the pandemic has largely left rural areas alone, and those tend to be right-leaning, with minimal social distancing guidelines. So in other words, letting the disease spread would increase the number of people opposing Trump, while keeping the ones who support him well off for the most part. So essentially, if you just let the pandemic spread, you kill off a lot of the people who are going to vote against you, while empowering those who are otherwise, if they just keep 6 feet apart, they're going to be okay. I'd like your take on this.
So you're saying that Trump actually acted malevolently on purpose because he knew that by being deliberately negligent toward the virus, he would first off be able to, quote, reduce panic, as he put it. But secondly, he would be able to gain in terms of his antagonism toward particular ethnic groups in his own country, because he understood that these groups would be most negatively affected by the virus. So, you're ascribing to him deliberate intent here.
I wouldn't put it past him. And
Okay.
I do recall in the Woodward tapes him saying that he actually wants the disease to spread. Now, to be fair, it could be he wanted the disease to spread for the same reason Boris Johnson originally wanted to, because you want to create herd immunity.
So-called herd
immunity.
immunity.
The science quickly debunked that.
Indeed. And so this is the thing which I think you have seized upon, which is quite important, which is that if the science had debunked herd immunity at the very beginning, and if these individuals knew how deadly the virus was at the very beginning when it first entered their respective countries, then this applies both to Boris Johnson and to Donald J. Trump, what conclusion should be reached about the fact that they nevertheless chose to allow it to spread anyway? You could very well theorize some malevolent reason behind it.
So wait.
I think that when it comes to this, I don't want to engage in the kind of like I guess machinations that you should go with constructing these kind of narratives. At the moment, I see where you're coming from, Coronis, and I can see the reasons for why you may believe that he's doing this intentionally. But my reasoning at the moment, since I don't have enough evidence to conclude that, is that what's happening purely is just negligence. So you're essentially incompetent leadership.
I think he's just downplaying it to make it seem like he cares about us and he's just being sympathetic. I don't think it's like some coordinated conspiracy. I think he's
But he
malicious.
still downplays it, though.
I mean, I think he's malicious, but I don't think he's that malicious. I don't think it's like some
I wouldn't put it
conspiracy.
past.
So
Well,
you're gonna
listen, as we're going to get
employ,
into later, though. I'm sorry, Voltaire, but I wouldn't put. The reason I say I wouldn't put it past him is because we know of the human rights abuses in ICE detention facilities, and if Trump is patting these ICE officials on the back despite all these investigations against them, I wouldn't put it past him. The man who seems to be fine with forced sterilizations, using disease as a political
Forced sterilizations. I don't know.
That is a form of eugenics, by the way. Using disease.
Is he doing that? That seems a little. I don't know. Where are you getting your information from? Where does he do? Because I heard the same thing, but someone said that, but it was just really just hearsay. I heard the same thing on the grapevine. So where are you getting that he's? Where are you getting that he's doing
it is a
forced
whistleblower.
sterilizations?
The story about the sterilizations thing is that there was a whistleblower within the border. What is it? Border B something.
ICE.
Is it ICE? Sorry, ICE. Yes, I'm confusing the two organizations. Yes. So it was a nurse who worked within ICE who had a whistleblower complaint that she wrote where she described that there was a particular doctor that they were constantly bringing to patients. And then this doctor would almost always call for a hysterectomy every single time they presented with any kind of problem whatsoever, right? And so the doctor started to become known as the uterus collector. They started to call him. Now imagine the uterus collector. That's completely crazy. So
they couldn't come up with a better name.
They started to
investigate. That's on an individual basis, though. That's
hold on. They started to find out. They started to investigate to find out who the uterus collector was. They found a specific doctor who was engaging in this behavior.
It's Dr. Fauci. No, I'm kidding.
It's not Dr. Fauci, but I can't remember the guy's name. But they found out who the doctor was, and then they discovered that this individual was not even did not even have the certification with the Obgyn boards that you ordinarily would have certification with. So, like, why is ICE contracting these operations to this like literal random? Right.
Well, not to mention though, the whistleblower.
It looks like it's malevolent.
The whistleblower also. Based on my interpretation of the transcript, because she gave a speech, was that she also that ICE intentionally wanted COVID-19 to spread in the detention centers to essentially depopulate the camps.
Oh,
yes, I remember that
as well. That is inside this. That was inside this the whistleblower statements as well, where
and that's also why I said I wouldn't put it past him if Trump wanted to use the virus to get rid of his political opponents, because ICE already does it. And he puts them on the back.
No, I understand. I understand what Coronis is saying here. He's saying that if they can do it in the microcosm, what moral impediment would they have to doing it in the macro?
So, I'm not really sure about this was planned or all. I'm more in the camp of never attribute malice that which is like adequately explained by stupidity. I'm in that camp. I'm in Razor's camp.
I'm thinking that Coronis is taking a position that, yes, that is so, that you would use that form of Occam's razor, that you wouldn't attribute to malice what could be accurately described as stupidity. But in this case, could stupidity have got you to that result?
You see, the thing is with me, I think I lean more towards the Trump is stupid camp as opposed to the Trump is evil camp.
Yeah, but I mean, for the sake of argument, for the sake of Coronis's argument, could someone arrive at those particular preferences and that particular sequence of decisions purely through stupidity alone?
Well, can I just say to address Coronis,
I think you could.
I think I have something very quickly to respond to Jade, and then I'll let you go, Anthony. My apologies.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is that I'm not necessarily in the Trump is an evil genius or the Trump is stupid camp. I'm sort of in the middle where I'm not a trained psychiatrist, by the way. However, I would say that based on my experience, that mental illness runs in my family, that Trump might be an NPD sufferer, and that means narcissistic personality.
Oh, you should, yeah, definitely. Let
me finish. The thing about narcissists is narcissists generally have a higher IQ. However, they also have a big ego that tends to curtail the full extent of their intelligence. So sometimes Trump does something that is actually quite nasty, but he does so intelligently, but when his ego gets in the way, he does stupid stuff. So that's why narcissists, even though they have a high IQ, their ego gets in the way of that. So in my view, Trump is just a narcissist. So he's in between intelligent and stupid. He's just a narcissist. He's just full of himself.
You should read Mary Trump's book, which talks about, because Mary Trump, who's his niece, is a psychiatrist, and she talks all about it's like the only book that has been written that's actually, that I think accurately sort of analyzes his mental health.
I don't think Trump is in the stupid camp, nor is he in the evil genius camp. I think he is a narcissist. So that means
I think like someone like Ted Cruz is a sociopath. Someone like Trump is a narcissist.
Why do you think Ted Cruz is a sociopath? It's popular to hate him, but why do you think he's a sociopath?
He's just
okay.
This is not. I don't want to go into this conversation.
Investigating Ted Cruz.
I want Anthony to talk about this.
Topic. Anthony was supposed to go next.
Okay, sorry. I apologize. I am actually getting frustrated by all the interrupting. But what was I going to say now? Fuck. What I was going to say is that I get where you're coming from, Ray, when it comes to like whether or not he's actually intending to do this, or is incompetent, or is stupid. The results are still the same, and I will say to you that that is a good argument, because you may accidentally shoot someone and kill them, or you may intentionally shoot someone and kill them. The end result is that person's dead. So I get where you are coming from with that.
But we're trying to understand the casus belli of it, right? So
yeah, I mean, the underlying cause though is that I can understand Coronis' argument that he's actually, it is still nevertheless important to know if it was done on purpose or by accident, because if it is by accident, by stupidity, that is one thing. But if it's done on purpose, then it means you can extrapolate that to other decisions that might be made later and conclude that ill intent may once again manifest.
And not to mention, I guess we're meshing topics again, like we just did. But the thing is that intention also kind of matters, because let us say there's like some sort of secret documentation out there that shows that Trump deliberately wanted to spread the virus to target certain ethnic minority groups. If he wanted the virus to spread to hurt minority groups, that's really no different than a dictator causing a famine in an ethnic minority province to essentially depopulate them, like Stalin did in the Holocaust.
That is a powerful argument.
So my point is that if it does turn out, for example, that Trump did want the virus to essentially depopulate Black and Hispanic communities, that would be genocide under the UN definition, and that's serious. If you can establish intention, then you have a solid argument.
No, so I mean, I understand where you're coming from. That's actually what makes that a powerful argument, because the intent actually does matter then.
Oh, I would say again that there would have to have strong evidence, because at the moment it's out there. It's an out there, you could say, speculation, and I can see where you're basing it off of. But then you could always just go to the whole thing as well, with like when it comes to China and saying that China deliberately allowed this virus to spread, and in order to undermine, for example, your statement.
There would have to be solid evidence. Yeah. You have to make sure you really got the evidence in there. So I totally agree with Anthony as well, what Anthony is saying there, that in order to catch Trump in something like that, it needs to be solid.
Yeah, but the problem with that, though, is that it's sort of like how, even though we sort of knew about MK Ultra, for example, like starting the early 80s because of the Rockefeller Commission, a lot of the abuses and excesses of MK Ultra didn't come to light until like the 2010s, like 40, 50 years later. And so the problem is that even if it were true that Trump is using genocide against Black and Hispanic communities through the pandemic, we wouldn't know until like 30 or 40 years later when the relevant documentation is declassified, if it ever is classified.
No, I mean, that is the painful part, and I think that everyone watching should really take that one to heart as well. And this is why, and I don't think anyone on this panel will disagree with me, this is why the election that is coming up in November is one of such consequence. Because even if we do not know whether he is or is not intending to allow the health disaster to become the maximum level of disaster, the fact that he has, either through ignorance or through deliberate malice, allowed these events to occur, makes him fundamentally unfit for office.
That's why I say at the end of the day, I'm on the side that he's incompetent.
Yeah, I mean, even if we resort to the backstop of, okay, let's say he's just incompetent, that is still a powerful argument for him being voted out of office in November.
Wait, I remember from one of my bosses. He said he rather preferred Trump, other 4 years of Trump, just to demonstrate how stupid, absurd politics has gotten in the U.S. So we have
that's accelerationism. Oh, that's bad.
Vulgar accelerationism at that. No, deliberately hurting yourself to prove a point, generally not a good way to do politics.
But if that happens and we have other 4 years of Trump, you think America will learn and recalibrate itself?
Considering how because listen, considering how masochistic Trump supporters tend to be, I don't think so. I think another 4 years of Trump will not only embolden his fan base, which is already absurdly masochistic, it also paved the way for, like, imagine
something worse.
Yeah, imagine if Trump's family, other Trump family members like Donald Trump Jr., tried running for election.
Exactly.
You would essentially have a Trump dynasty, which would
the situation has not yet reached the maximum badness which it could have reached, and so it needs to be stopped as soon as possible. And also, I would add, I mean, the Young Turks went around with a microphone the other day, and I know some people are going to be rolling their eyes as the Young Turks, but this is no, seriously. They went around with a microphone and started putting this microphone in the face of like random Trump supporters at like Trump rallies or whatever, and asked them like neutral questions. Like, they didn't announce themselves as being the Young Turks, right? So they're not getting literal troll responses. So. And these are mostly like baby boomers. They were putting this microphone in front of them. They were saying, like, you know, if Trump loses the election, like, what would your reaction to that be? And every single response that these people in the red hats were giving as their reaction to a hypothetical in which Trump loses an election in November was absolutely outside the scope of normal politics. Like,
move to Panama.
Yeah, things like move to Panama, or we know that Biden has made a pact with Satan, and other ridiculous claims such as this, right? All of this kind of stuff means that, like, no matter how bad the situation becomes, people who believe that kind of rhetoric and are so enmeshed with the Trump syndrome that they're unable to separate themselves from support for Trump, they're not going to suddenly start disliking him when the body count becomes higher. They're already at 200,000 deaths and they haven't yet freaked out. At 500,000, does anyone imagine they're going to be more freaked out?
And also, I didn't know about Panama, though, that they essentially have an open border to the U.S., or is that an exaggeration?
No, I mean, they do. There is an agreement between the United States and Panama on, like, some stuff. I just don't know how much it was exaggerated in that interview.
Fair enough. So, is talking about the side chat not allowed here? I just want to ask. Is that okay?
You can mention things from the side chat so long as those things do not violate terms of service.
Gotcha. So Unlife says that he thinks that Trump is incompetent and malicious. Again, I would say he is a narcissist, so he would be in between an evil genius and letting his ego make him stupid.
So do you think he's like Brain from Pinky and the Brain?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think of Trump.
Brain from Pinky and the Brain. Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, that's an interesting comparison as well in and of itself.
But Nick,
the audience is old enough to remember that comparison.
I mean, he must have grown up in the 90s. But anyway, Mick.
Yeah, anyone who's grown up in the 90s is going to totally get that joke.
Mick says, I grew up in the 2000s.
Fair enough. But Mick says, I say punish the Dems for he used their improperly, their incompetent choice. Look at the
incompetent choice.
New wars.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to decode that because I can actually see, it's Mick saying that in the chat, that the Dems should be punished for their incompetent choice. I mean, I'm not sure what he means by that. I mean, is he referring to
lockdown too far, I guess?
I mean, maybe he's saying that they should have selected Bernie Sanders as their nominee or something. But I mean, even then, at this point, they can't possibly be still bickering over which Democratic nominee would have been the better one. I mean,
exactly.
On the one hand, any random adult 2020 versus the present occupant of the White House who has clearly demonstrated himself to be unfit. So at this point, it doesn't really matter what you elect. You could elect a box of Tic Tacs and it would govern better than Donald Trump is governing.
So on life, you agree that Trump, you agree with Volt's analysis that Trump is essentially Brain from Pinky and the Brain.
Gee, Brain, what are you going to do tonight?
No, but,
the same thing we do every
night.
Okay, sorry.
You were next in the line anyway. Go on.
Yeah, I would just say that I would argue that Trump is incompetent. And I know that there's this guy Mick that says, look at the bright side, no new wars. But look at it like this: when you step away from the global stage, when you sort of like disregard international law, and you essentially allow autocrats to have a sort of like free reign, that doesn't actually decrease wars; it increases the chances of them.
Yeah.
So it's important, for example, to have competent leadership, because whether I like America or not, it is the global hegemon. It's one of the global hegemon. It's the sort of the force that represents the liberal world order. And without its essentially, or at least a multilateral, I would love a multilateral initiative to sort of like stand behind international law or stand behind human rights or stand up against tyrants, then what you have essentially is the illiberal world order that comes in led by Putin, led by people like Xi Jinping, who despise liberalism, who want to push only their global hegemon at the sake of people's lives and that. You actually, in other words, what I'm saying, to sort of summarize, to get to the point, it doesn't end wars. It only increases the chances of more of them occurring.
I mean, I agree. To add to that agreement, I would say that in terms of even if you didn't look at it from a perspective of what the values the individuals held were, purely on competence alone, you don't want large hegemonic powers in the world to be governed by entirely unpredictable or potentially non-sane individuals, right? So even if you're looking at it let's say that you don't like the United States, right? Even then, Joseph Biden would be more predictable and more competent than a further administration of Donald Trump. I think everyone on the panel can agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I am a little worried about this rhetoric that Biden has dementia or something, because
he doesn't. He seems to be perfectly in control of his own faculties, as far as I can understand it.
Yeah, the thing is that conservatives like to nitpick these cases of him stuttering or saying something random. But first of all, if you have
a speech impediment.
Yeah, he has a bad speech impediment, and he's always had it.
Exactly. So he's always spoken that way. And I'm sure that many of the people making these criticisms, they can't possibly do public speaking better than Joseph Biden does. Most of them would probably be worse than him at public speaking.
This is also why I dislike the Bernie crowd, because Bernie bros and Trump supporters, when it comes to criticizing the so-called establishment Democrats, they go hand in hand. So Donald Trump essentially took the arguments made from Bernie bros that Biden is mentally incompetent or unfit for office. And the same thing happened in 2016. Bernie's arguments against Hillary were used by Trump. And Bernie bros and Trump supporters were all in on it. It's scummy, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is another thing is that many of these people who have gotten up on on live streams and so on have been essentially attacking Joseph Biden on small clips and excerpts that have been taken of speeches that he has made. If someone were to go backward through every single piece of live stream footage that any of these people have ever generated, I'm sure they'd be able to cherry pick some times when the person was stumbling over their own words at some point. You're always going to have that happen at some point. Right? You can't be just completely wrote on point every single time, like if you're reciting from a teleprompter when you're not. I like to think that I'm at least semi-good at this, but I'm sure that I repeat my own words sometimes, or that I stumble over my words at some point in time. So I'm willing to forgive Joseph Biden if he does this himself occasionally.
I personally think he's going to die in office.
Well, even if he does, then Kamala Harris becomes the president, and I think she's pretty qualified. I actually like Kamala, although I think she had a terrible track record as a prosecutor. But anyway,
yeah.
And also anyone who wants to do that comparison as well, if they want to compare Kamala Harris to Vice President Mike Pence, again, the choice should be quite obvious.
Well,
Mike Pence is worse.
Can I just also say that if you're comparing Trump to Biden in terms of competency, you just have to look at Biden's record as a senator, as a politician in office, as also a vice president. And then you look at Donald Trump's record. You look at which one composed themselves and actually knows stuff about foreign policy and domestic policy in general, as opposed to one that, who doesn't, essentially.
Exactly. One of them has experience and connections.
There's no comparison in my mind.
Who have experience.
Yeah.
And the connections to people who have experience thing is so important as well, because we've seen the kind of people that Donald Trump has essentially put into positions around him. are basically the kind of people who think like him, which has produced incredibly ridiculous results in almost.
Yeah, Lincoln once said that you should judge a president or a leader. I'm paraphrasing, by the way, because I don't remember the exact quote. You should judge a politician or a leader or a statesman. Yeah, I think he said statesman. You should judge a statesman by the sort of people he surrounds himself with. So he was referring to cabinets, and since Trump's cabinets are full of self-interested assholes, you can assume that Trump is a self-interested asshole.
So, man, I'm wondering, what happened in the last 50 years or so? Because back in the day, to LBJs, to Nixon, people actually care about upholding the integrity of Congress, the White House. What happened in the last? What changed? You know?
Doesn't it lead to like the whole
partisan behavior in overdrive to the point where now you can essentially just say, well, what about the basic decency of such and such a choice? And then someone will respond back to you with like, well, we're here owning libs, so it doesn't matter. Right?
My friend blamed postmodernism for the deconstruction and
losing environment, right?
Yeah, losing legitimacy in our institution. So he blames that. Actually, I am coming around that position when more I think about it.
I mean, it would be interesting to see someone critically examine that. I mean, I don't know what conclusion they would come to. I'm not able to like decisively make a call on that myself.
It just goes to that whole, like that whole ultra conservative argument that freaking political correctness is what destroys.
No. I don't think it's that shallow. I think it has an interest.
I think it means that when you have a certain level of skepticism toward all institutions, regardless of what happens, then those who occupy those institutions might also ironically develop that sort of skepticism and begin just acting out.
Yeah, it's just. I think that's a much more interesting and deeper take, not the Jordan B. Peterson level. We must stop this postmodern neo-Marxist, and Zizek will say, "Who are these postmodern neo-Marxists?" Like.
I watched that debate. Pretty funny.
Yeah, and then the whole thing literally just implodes on itself for like about 90 minutes of self-implosion from Jordan B. Peterson.
We should probably go to the next topic, Maria.
Oh yes, no, I'm sorry. So yeah, does everyone believe we've covered the Woodward tapes to the maximum extent we're willing to do it this week?
Yes, and as well as ICE. We already did ICE too, so we can scrap that topic off with the UN thing too.
We actually had these things intersect at the same time. So what I'll do is we'll go to our second break because we've never had a second break before, but this time we do need one. So we'll go to our second break, and then when we come back from that, we'll cover the remaining topics, which I think are shorter ones. Are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll see you all in about 5 minutes.
Nice.
And it looks like we're back from the break. So the topic is going to be US Supreme Court nominations that we're supposed to talk about. And then our topic after that is going to be Trump's attempt to bypass the electoral process. It's just these two topics we're going to do before we close the stream out. And then, we'll be back again this time next week to do the same thing again, because we're going to be more consistent than we've ever been before. So US Supreme Court nominations. We're at the point where, we have seen the events happening around Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she was a very notable Supreme Court justice. Someone described her as, quote, a national icon who leaves behind an incredible legacy of standing up for and fighting for women's equality. And they said that the United States was fortunate to have her sitting on the nation's highest court, etc. So obviously, may her memory be a blessing, etc., etc. I think is what is appropriate to be said in that situation. That's what they usually say.
May she rest in power.
According to Alex Jones, she actually died in a blood ritual that sacrificed babies.
Wow.
I'm not even joking. It was on an episode of InfoWars yesterday.
That takes us to where we're going with the whole, what is the right-wing reaction to this whole situation? So basically,
we have one.
they've basically gone wild, as we have seen. And you've got Mitch McConnell coming out saying he wants to appoint a new justice as soon as possible. And you've also got Lindsey Graham, who had promised previously that you could hold his words against him if he said he wanted to replace a justice in an election year with only a certain number of days remaining until the election, that he should not do that, and that we should remind him by playing back the audio to him of what he said. And then what happened? Mainstream media played back Lindsey Graham's audio to him, and then he just basically looked at it and was like, okay, yeah, but whatever. So now that we're
hilarious.
Where they're in like full hypocrisy mode, like,
I don't care at this point. Honestly, at this point, I'm just like, whatever. Like, at this point, I'm just gonna fucking Thucydides this shit and just like sit back, let what happens happen, and just write about it.
Just eating that popcorn, right?
And write about it, like Thucydides. He was basically just like, he just wrote about the shit. Like, he wasn't a history maker. He was a history writer.
Was Thucydides the original person who just wanted to grill?
Basically.
Wait, I thought he was an Italian general.
He was. No, I mean, what I just mean is be the observer and just let what happens happen and just write about it.
To keep us within the time constraint, though, so we've heard that Collins is saying that she's not going to vote to confirm any candidate that Trump nominates until after the election. Murkowski also floated the idea that she would hold this position and then kind of walked it back a little bit about 24 hours ago. And we're pretty sure that the nominee that they're going to try to put in there is going to be Amy Coney Barrett, who the last time
not as bad as I thought at first.
But I mean, the last time when I was on your show, Politicrat, we talked about that, and I didn't know her name at that point, and I said that I heard it was going to be someone who is, quote, a Catholic fundamentalist. And then
there's no such thing as a Catholic.
People push back by saying that you can't necessarily be a Catholic fundamentalist, because I think
Christian fundamentalist is something completely different. Like, they're two completely separate movements.
But then it turned out that that was not the correct way to describe it, but that she was a member of some kind of strange charismatic organization, which had actually been the basis for which the author of A Handmaid's Tale had actually based her book on. That then sent shockwaves through social media, and everyone was literally freaking out at that point. Like, I am of the
just to bring it back into, so I fancy myself a historian. I am of the historical school that you cannot go backwards. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm like a believer in like progress or anything in the Whig sense, because I generally subscribe to a more cyclical view. But I believe that societies have lifespans, and that in a society cannot regress backwards in terms of like reversing some kind of long-standing cultural precedent. Like, for instance, like, I don't think our society will ever, I think it's impossible that our society will ever go back on gay marriage. I don't think that we're ever going to repeal Roe v. Wade, because history doesn't really work like that. Basically, in the same sense that an 80-year-old man can never go back to being 60.
This actually is perfect, because you mentioned how we haven't gone back on Roe v. Wade since 1973, even though Republican presidents have ensured a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. So they have many opportunities to get rid of.
I think the entropy. I literally think there is such thing as historical entropy that fundamentally, almost scientifically, prevents us from going back. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, but the problem with Trump, though, is that Trump is a very unique case where the judges he wants to appoint are not judges that are necessarily ideologically aligned with conservatism, i.e. textualism and originalism. He wants to appoint judges who will essentially approve of whatever he does.
And look at Gorsuch. Gorsuch has been pretty great.
This is why I am sympathetic towards the Democrats who want to do court packing, which is essentially extend the size of the Supreme Court.
That scares me, honestly.
It does. This is the thing. Like, I'm sympathetic towards why they want to pack the courts, as well as end the filibuster, because Republicans, ever since this election, have been.
It's kind of like Republicans cheat all the time, so why don't they start cheating?
Yeah, but the problem is that I think it's short, like, because even if you have like 11, 12, or 13 Supreme Court judges and you end the filibuster, once Republicans take power again, and they will, it's historically inevitable, it's inevitable that they will take control of political institutions again. It will backfire, so Democrats will be out of the filibuster, not Republicans, and conservatives will just appoint more judges to the Supreme Court when they enter power.
It's suicide. Exactly.
Imagine having a 10 judges on a 13 maximum Supreme Court.
Do you know what it reminds me? It reminds me of like their positions on the Electoral College. Whenever it works out for the Republicans, the Democrats come out against the Electoral College, and then whenever the Electoral College doesn't work out for the Republicans come out against the Electoral College. Been like that for the past 100 years. It's just sore. At this point, it's just sore losers. They're just sore losers. All of the sides. Yeah.
Well, the problem is that
also something that I would add to this, and also we're still on the time constraint, so we need to definitely wrap this particular topic up as quickly as possible. But the thing that I would say is that many of these issues the Americans seem to be having right now with the Supreme Court being so pivotal in terms of people's rights, right? Where basically, you lose one Supreme Court justice and suddenly everything gets thrown into disarray. Part of this, I think, is because of the fact that successive administrations over the years have failed to codify in law many of the basic rights that people see themselves as having today, and they are held in place only by specific interpretations of laws that were not explicitly written to cover those issues. You get what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, gender equality and so on, right? These are specific interpretations of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, if these things had been properly amended to very explicitly describe the rights that they were conferring onto people, then this whole situation would be much less dire than it presently is. And I think that for going forward in a hypothetical Biden administration, they need to have perhaps near the top of their list of priorities codifying things that should have been codified years ago.
Exactly. But I think that is my point, though, is that I think RBG being gone, which is actually surreal. Like when certain people die after you basically grew up with them, so to speak, for lack of better words, it's surreal that they're gone. Like they're just suddenly.
Yeah, I agree.
When other people died, like Stan Lee, for example, when Stan Lee died, I was like, what? This isn't real, because it didn't feel real. I don't know how to describe.
That was like me with David Bowie.
It was same for me with Kobe Bryant.
Okay, we're getting off topic again, but my point is, though, is that RBG dying. I'm divided on court packing because of the reasons I outlined earlier, but it seems like it might be considered a necessary evil for now, right, Ray? Because if you want to prevent Trump from having corrupt judges taking the Supreme, like one of the people he wanted to appoint was Ted Cruz. Imagine Ted Cruz being on the Supreme Court. That'd be absurd.
So this is why I would meet you halfway on the sympathy in that regard. Like, it's one of those things where I can totally understand why someone would want to go with the pack the court approach if Joseph Biden wins the election. However, you don't want to announce that and essentially like let loose that idea into the universe now. Like, they shouldn't have mentioned it now, because now they've already said it. It now means that the Republicans can also just say, well, you would have packed the court, so why can we also not do so?
Politicians should not be able to be appointed to be Supreme Court justice. It should only be limited to federal justice.
Yeah, Ted Cruz should not be on the Supreme Court. I'm sorry.
I think Democrats should not have mentioned publicly the idea of packing the court. It should have been only in dark rooms should the concept of packing the
cigar
court.
Smoke, filled with cigar smoke.
It's just so bizarre because
only on November the 4th. Only on November the 4th should they be having that conversation. No, but then again, not even November the 4th, because you wouldn't even have finished counting all of the mail-in ballots by that point, because someone has been ripping up all the mailboxes. But we'll get to that shortly. But not until December. Not until December should anyone even have been talking about packing the court.
Yeah, not to mention though, like, packing the courts has not been. There hasn't been an attempt to pack the court since
FDR.
Yeah.
Because FDR tried to get some New Deal policies in, but the Supreme Court ruled, no, this is unconstitutional. You can't do this. So he's like, well, tough shit. I'm gonna pack the courts so I can fill judges with people who think the New Deal is perfectly constitutional.
Exactly.
Yeah, FDR was enough. FDR was America's first dictator for life.
In FDR's America, the executive branch judges you.
No, but if you think about it, he kind of was America's first dictator.
No. We're not getting into that.
That would be a whole topic in and of itself, like characterizing what FDR did not do. But
not even saying that negatively. I'm just saying that as a thing.
Yeah, but obviously, keep that one as a thing, because that could be a topic of conversation.
I might do an episode on that. That would be interesting.
Yeah, because I've heard people advancing this debate on one side or the other before, and then of course you end up veering into like the historical takes on those who wanted FDR to not be president. Wink, wink. Yeah. What their views on all of this were as well. So I know, it's an extremely interesting point in American history. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be discussed. I'm just saying that we're going to run out of time if we do.
Yeah.
So could we all agree that we've basically covered the Supreme Court nomination topic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we all agree that Ted Cruz should not be on the Supreme Court?
And that Ted Cruz definitely should never be on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Or Tom
Ted Cruz should not even have a political career.
Also, Tom Cotton should not be on the Supreme Court, because that would be bad too.
Oh yeah, Tom Cotton also should never be on
although he might be slightly less bad than Cruz, because at least he's going to be out of the fort. At least he'll no longer have say on foreign policy in the Senate.
Yeah, but that's like choosing which kind of stinging nettles would you like to roll in?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so both of them just need to go retire to a farm in their hick states.
It's like choosing between being stung by a bee or a wasp.
Yeah.
At least bees are kind of cute. Wasps are just gross.
Oh yeah, wasps are yeah.
But neither Cruz nor Cotton, they're both wasps.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay, so with that said, I need to update the topic to the next thing. So the next topic is, Trump administration is trying to bypass election results. So let me just make that an update, and you guys can decide how you're going to approach this. Anthony recently put out a what do you call this thing?
Thread.
Anthony recently put out a Twitter thread actually describing the events that occurred. So he can. So I'll actually let him be the one to summarize it if he wants to do that.
Okay, so basically, Trump said recently, I think it was just yesterday, he said, Trump may win or lose, but he will never concede. And the argument goes that he essentially said during one of his press talks that he may potentially extend if I don't know the exact wording for it because I've completely forgot, I'm just going off of the base of memory, but the argument goes is that what I said in my thread was essentially how Trump could potentially attempt to bypass the election, and the gist is that faithless electors will try to justify their behavior by talking about problems with processing mail-in ballots. problems the Trump White House, in fact, exacerbated from the start. This is the logic that Trump campaigns potentially intend to use on election night. They know bypass the election will cause a loss of legitimacy, and so the Trump campaign could, you could say, I don't know what the word would be for it, could potentially say that the justification for essentially extent, because essentially, how can I put this into words? I think, Ray, you could sort of like also do a little bit of summary on this as well.
So basically what you're saying is that Trump is trying to provide a justification for why he thinks it would be necessary to have faithless electors vote on the Electoral College in a direction other than that which the ballots indicate they ought.
Okay, here's a conspiracy theory I have. I wonder if Trump might just be, in this instance, and many other instances in the past, actually a whistleblower, and he is outwardly revealing what the establishment has been doing for decades. And that's actually what's already been happening.
What you mean?
Just a thought.
You mean you're proposing? Well, not proposing, but you're saying that there are people out there who may believe that the mail-in ballots are indeed in some way.
No. I'm talking about faithless electors. Just in general, what if for decades the political elite has been purposefully orchestrating it in such a way where
everyone would know, because when a faithless elector
true, you know what? Okay.
It shows up immediately as the person did not vote in line with what
that's
the result
right.
was.
Okay, yeah, never mind. I'm tired. I don't know. I think I was completely.
I'm tired too. I think we're all tired.
No,
okay.
I think it was still a good question
sense,
to the audience, though.
In
it was
this
still a good
sense,
question to the audience.
In this sense, I'm just gonna be outright. I think Trump is just trolling. I think he might just be trolling.
I honestly think, and this goes into the whole Trump is a narcissist and not an evil genius or stupid person. He's somewhere in the middle.
I think he's a troll. He's literally a troll.
I think this is strategic. In other words, what I mean by that is, you see, he tried to claim that mail-in ballots corrupt and unreliable, which is not true, by the way. And I
think they can be, but not to the extent.
Let me finish. Can you let me finish, please? He does this around the time when we realized that a lot of people would rather vote by mail because they don't want to catch the coronavirus. So by claiming the mail-in ballots are corrupt when most people want to do it now, then if he loses, then he can just claim that the election results are not valid because mail-in ballots are corrupt. So I think he strategically chose
to make that statement at that time.
Yeah, because the thing is,
the launched his campaign against mail-in ballot voting because it would increase his election results because a lot of people who wouldn't vote, who want to vote by mail but wouldn't be able to, are more likely wanting to stay at home for safety reasons. But at the same time, the places that don't do it, he can just claim the results from those states are invalid. So it's a win-win for him.
That's exactly. I mean, from what the article in the Atlantic said. From the article in the Atlantic, they're saying that that's exactly what the intent was when they had that discussion, and these unnamed Republican officials, and one of them actually was in fact named. It's I think it's someone from the Pennsylvania Republican Party actually went on the record with their own name, as insane as that may sound, and described that as being the exact justification they wanted to use, which is that they are anticipating that Democrats will want to have the mail-in ballots counted because obviously that's part of how the American democracy actually works. However, because of the fact that sorting this mail and getting it delivered and counted is going to take longer because someone has been hobbling the performance of the mail service in the US, cough, cough, they're going to end up dragging out the count to beyond election day. Then they're going to come out, as in they being the Republican Party, are going to come out and say, well, the count is going on beyond election day. They're going to then propose that this looks like some kind of malfeasance might be happening and that maybe somehow magically Democrats may be in some way responsible for it, or somehow Antifa or something nonsensical like this. And then Trump will use that as an excuse to have faithless electors make their own decision, which will, of course, be...
To elaborate, though. To elaborate on what I said, though, very quickly. What I meant to say, because I realized I didn't really put it in adequate terms. What I meant to say was that, see, by him trying to launch this campaign against mail-in voting, Republican states are going to either get rid of mail-in ballots or they're going to make it. They're going to quote unquote make it more accountable, which is not true because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But Republican states will essentially be decreasing the amount of Democrats who will be voting because they're the ones who take the coronavirus most seriously. Democratic states are going to try to keep the mail-in ballots the way they are because, for the most part, they're okay.
Oh, right. And so then they'll be
able to do is that the Republicans. So Republican states are going to continue voting for him, but the Democratic states that don't vote for him, he can claim that those results from those Democratic states are invalid. So therefore, he wins the election.
I see. No, I totally understand where you're coming from there. No, that's actually quite cunning. So I can imagine on election day that they're going to start sending out that kind of ridiculous signaling. Bear in mind, we have seen this kind of signaling take place before, like in parts of Eastern Europe. You've seen this kind of situation play out. Vladimir Putin himself has in fact done this, right? So it's going to be like a fire hose of disinformation is going to start coming out on the day of the election, and it's going to be all designed for the purpose of preparing for an attempt by the Trump administration to bypass the actual election results using the I guess you could say some loopholes in the way that the American constitutional system works, because technically there is nothing in the American Constitution or in any law, with the exception of states that have explicitly passed such laws, that says that you must respect the tally. Faithless electors can exist in various states that have not passed laws saying that they must vote in accordance, that the electoral college must reflect the voting on the ground.
Hey, so
I think,
Ray, why don't you
at the end here.
Hold on, one of you at a time. I'll let Politicrat go first, Vault afterwards.
So Ray, why don't you tell us what our old pal Rave Dubin has been up to? Everyone's favorite classical shitlib.
Yeah, Dave Rubin, as opposed to David Rubin covering this story in the way that you would expect him to cover it, or the way you'd expect a normal human being to cover it, I should say. Instead, Dave Rubin decided to cover it from the perspective of how is this all Harry Reid's fault for having gone against the filibuster or something, which was totally a whack way of covering the story. And so I think everyone in the entire sort of like live streamosphere greeted that with complete and uproarious laughter.
So
yeah, even those on the right.
Yeah, even people on the right were just like, wow, he's trying so hard here to present himself as this kind of like centrist figure of whatever. But like every single time Dave Rubin speaks, he's just constantly helping Trump or seeking to muddy the waters in ways that are helpful to him.
Yeah, like I don't think he likes Trump. I just think he likes the money of the people
that
who
are.
like Trump.
Yeah,
It
agree.
might be Tim Pool. Tim Pool is very similar to Dave Rubin.
I think Tim Pool's a little better, but like I've always liked Tim, like as a person. However, I just don't like the direction that he's been going in. But I still watch him because it's for me it's like a Stockholm syndrome type thing with Tim Pool.
with Tim Pool though, Tim Pool has like openly dined with white supremacists, for example. He can't be taken seriously.
No. There was
like he had dinner with Baked
Alaska.
Yeah,
no, but it wasn't like a friendly pow like chummy dinner though. Like I mean, you could even take a look at the picture. He clearly does not want to be there.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't look comfortable in the photograph, but I mean, increasingly, if you look at the way that his streams have played out, like 60% of his sourcing now is like the Daily Mail.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have a problem. I don't even have a problem with the Daily Mail. I think what's bothering me is it's the Breitbart.
Yeah, and the Breitbart is on there as well.
Like 10 years. 10 years.
The Daily Mail is so unreliable that Wikipedia says you can never use the Daily Mail as a citation ever.
Is it worse? It's worse than the Guardian.
Yeah, it is recorded as being like the worst in the United Kingdom because of the fact that they have like a long and sordid reputation of just throwing things into the Daily Mail.
Wait, is it worse than the Sun?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. I mean, the Sun has done some pretty nonsensical things in its time, but I mean, they haven't done it for as long and as hard as the Daily Mail has been doing it.
So,
okay. But
we'll go next. You promised you let him go next.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did promise Vault would go next.
Yeah.
So do you think it's a good time to end the stream now, because we cover pretty much the meat assumptions of this topic?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I want to just finish off by saying that one of my friends just remarked to me actually via message, because he actually sent me only recently now the Atlantic article, which I already had quoted in the beginning of that, but he said to add his own 2 cents worth, and I actually kind of concur with him. And well, maybe he's a bit exaggerating here and there, but what's interesting, he says this. And by the way, this is not like off the cuff. It's just this is what he tweeted basically out to me. To add my 2 cents worth, election dispute will end up in Supreme Court or GOP judges will give victory to Trump and state apparatus, Pentagon, FBI, DOJ will enforce court's order. And he concludes that there's going to be like another civil war or something like that in the United States, which I think is a bit too far. But I think that there may be an election dispute that could potentially go on, when all over the mail-in ballots, basically.
Yeah, so. And I mean, I'm just going to say is I guess the closing thing on this, which is basically, the United States runs a risk at this point. I mean, they're at the risk of having a crisis of legitimacy then, if you become increasingly unsure as to who should have been elected. I mean, in 2016, for example, there was a lot of controversy about undue influence on the United States elections by outside parties. Now, this time around, you've got not only that still in play because it hasn't been directly addressed by the relevant institutions, but now you also have this concept of Trump administration attempting to bypass elections, right? So with this happening, I mean, governing in the United States is going to become increasingly difficult, I think. And so there may be actually dark times ahead, depending on how this plays out in November. I mean, I was talking to someone earlier on this week who said to me, the only way that you get through this without having a crisis of legitimacy is if it's landslide Biden victory. If it's landslide Biden victory,
I can't see that happening.
Have question marks over it.
I cannot see that happening.
I mean, exactly. So it is unlikely that you'll get a landslide in one direction or the other. But so crisis of legitimacy may be in the cards, and people are going to have to deal with that.
I just have one question for you guys before.
Okay.
So if Trump were a superhero, who do you think he would be? Because I'm having a tough time trying to decide if he would be the Homelander from Garth Ennis's comic book series The Boys, or if he would be Captain Underpants.
Captain Underpants.
I put him as Bizarro Superman, right?
The bastard cousin of Captain Underpants.
Where everything he does is backwards, right?
Exactly.
It's he's not saving the world. He's doing everything to actually destroy it because it is.
Oh
bizarre.
Yeah, no, that's basically the comic book series The Boys. The main villain is like a parody of Superman. It's basically it's set in a universe where basically our universe, but what if superheroes were real? They'd totally be corporate controlled, and they'd be total glorified celebrities and pieces of shit. And so the Superman stand-in is basically if Donald Trump had Superman's powers, and he's terrible.
Speaking of which, then I think everyone should give The Boys a watch and see how that whole thing plays out. Because I mean, it's on Netflix, right?
It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, it's on Amazon Prime. Sorry,
the adaptation. Yeah, the adaptation of the comic. But yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay, all right. And so I think we can actually close on that note. You all have done very well. Thank you for coming on. And we will do this again next week.
I'm already in bed with my lights off, and laying down.
Have a good day, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
See you all later.